Hey, welcome to Whispered Tales. Today, we are going to discuss how you can change your life.
The night before the change, Jordan Miller fell asleep on the couch with the TV still whispering old sitcom reruns. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon from a candle that had burned too low. A half-finished to-do list lay face down on the coffee table beneath an unpaid electric bill and a grocery receipt from last Tuesday. On the wall, a calendar showed 12 tidy squares, almost empty, a map of days that had passed without leaving much behind. At 3:17 a.m., the phone buzzed. It wasn't a text or a call, just a scheduled alarm Jordan had set months ago and forgotten to disable. Labeled in all caps, "Change your life." It had been a joke then, a burst of motivation after a podcast. But now, in the blue half-light of early morning, it sounded different. Less like a reminder and more like a knock on the door. Jordan blinked awake, the kind of awake that feels like surfacing from deep water. Outside, Chicago was quiet. The city held between breaths, traffic lights cycling through colors for nobody. A train moaned somewhere in the distance. The alarm kept pulsing, a metronome for a decision not yet made. With a thumb swipe, Jordan silenced the phone but didn't put it down. Instead, they stared at the ceiling and felt the familiar parade of thoughts. The job that paid the rent but took more than it gave. The clothes that no longer fit because the gym key sat unused. The idea of a novel outlined in a Google Doc, 12 pages of promise, 6 months untouched. The friendships thin as glass and just as fragile. The way the mirror had become a place to look past rather than into. Something felt like a held note that had gone sharp. That's when Jordan heard the tick. Not the clock on the wall, but the quiet interior tick of time, counting, kind, but not patient. It wasn't threatening, it was honest. Time moves. Jordan swung her feet to the floor. The wood was cool, enough to wake the senses. The TV muttered a laugh track that didn't land. Jordan found the remote, pressed power, and let the silence sit. In the dark, there was no distraction, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft complaint of the building's radiators, winter's bones creaking. Jordan opened the Notes app and typed a sentence without thinking. If I keep living like this, my future will look exactly like my past. They stared at the line for a long moment. It wasn't self-punishment, it was simple math. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Jordan felt something loosen, a knot coming undone. Memories flashed. Freshman year English, where Mrs. Alvarez had scrawled, "You have a voice, use it," in loopy red ink at the bottom of a short story about a haunted Ferris wheel. The smell of rain that summer when Jordan rode the train to the lake just to watch storm clouds muscle across the water. The time Jordan stayed late at the community center, running basketball drills with a kid who kept missing free throws until he didn't, and the grin that split his face like sunlight through blinds. Moments when life felt like a door opening inward. Jordan stood and padded to the kitchen. The coffee maker coughed to life. While it brewed, Jordan took inventory, not a moral inventory, a practical one. What did life actually look like? Work, customer support at a software company. Good benefits, predictable hours, soul-slowing sameness.
Reduce noise. Money, tight but not dire. Enough for rent, groceries, and the occasional Friday night delivery. Savings, a small emergency fund that looked like a puddle in a summer drought. Health, stretching, memories counted as cardio lately. Sleep was a gamble. Meals were a rotation of convenience. Relationships? A couple of friends from college, a brother in Denver they texted more than they called, and a handful of coworkers whose birthdays Jordan knew because of cupcakes in the break room. Dreams? A novel idea with a pulse. The itch to volunteer again. Maybe a switch into product design. Jordan liked solving problems and sketching interfaces when nobody was watching. Habits? Scroll, snack, say tomorrow. The coffee was ready. Jordan poured a mug and leaned on the counter. The apartment felt smaller and clearer at 3:29 a.m., like the rest of the world had been turned down so one voice could be heard. Jordan asked a question, out loud to the empty room. What if I stop waiting for motivation and build a system instead? It landed like a key in a lock. Motivation had always been a guest, welcome, exciting, unreliable. A system, though, could be a landlord, steady, boring, showing up whether you felt like it or not. Jordan didn't need a makeover montage. Jordan needed a calendar, a checklist, and a way to make small promises that actually got kept. The first promise would be one before sunrise. Start the day on purpose, not heroic, just deliberate. Jordan opened the laptop and created a new doc, Project Change. On the first page, they wrote 3 rules. 1. Make it obvious. If it's not visible, it won't happen. 2. Make it small. If it requires courage to start, it's too big. 3. Make it non-negotiable. If it's up for debate, it will lose. Then came the first system, the 3x3. 3 daily non-negotiables: health, work, personal growth. 3 weekly moves: relationships, environment, finances. 3 monthly leaps: skills, experiences, identity. For today's 3 daily non-negotiables, Jordan wrote, walk outside for 20 minutes before work. Ship 1 meaningful task at the job before noon. Write 200 words of the novel after dinner. The numbers were comically small on purpose. The point wasn't impressing anyone. The point was turning the engine over. Jordan added a sticky note to the fridge, win the morning. Another to the bathroom mirror, 200 words equals done. A third to the front door, keys, wallet, courage. It felt a little corny. It also felt like scaffolding, temporary support while something strong went up inside. The clock said 4:06 now. Jordan laced up running shoes. Outside, a pale ribbon of light gathered over the lake. The air bit the lungs in that clean, reduce noise, bracing way that tells you you're alive, and no, your phone won't help with this. Jordan started walking, past the corner deli that would open at 6, past a bus stop with last night's flyers half peeled, past a man in a bright orange beanie walking a dog that trotted like it knew secrets. Block by block, the city woke with Jordan. A bakery's back door yawed, warm air spilling sugar and yeast into the cold. A cyclist rattled over a pothole, cursing softly, then laughing. The lake heaved against the shore, slate and silver. Jordan walked until the thought arrived. Change is not a thunderclap, it's a metronome.
Back home, Jordan showered and dressed. The mirror didn't look different, but the posture did. Just a degree or two more vertical, like a tree unlearning wind. At the kitchen table, Jordan opened the work laptop and made a list of tasks. The first one, an overdue bug ticket that nobody wanted because the fix was boring and the customer was grumpy. Jordan smiled. Perfect. At 9:42, the ticket was closed, the customer mollified, and Jordan's brain hummed with the satisfaction of ship something. Lunch was a turkey sandwich and a glass of water. Not because of a diet, but because clarity had rode in on morning's coattails and stayed. Jordan texted old friend Maya. Random thought. Want to grab coffee this weekend? I owe you a catch-up. The three dots blinked. Yes, Saturday? A small string was thrown across a small gap. A bridge later. At 7:11 p.m., Jordan sat at the tiny desk by the window, opened the novel doc, and wrote. The night the Ferris wheel stopped, the town held its breath. 212 words later, Jordan closed the laptop. It wasn't brilliant. It was done. When night rolled back in, Jordan stood again in the kitchen, feeling the same apartment, but not the same person. Not transformed. Tuned. The notes of the day lined up into something like a melody. The alarm at 3:17 a.m. had been a knock. Jordan had opened the door, and the first boxes had been carried in. Nothing heavy, just the basics. Before bed, Jordan added one more line to the Project Change doc. Day 1, I kept 3 promises to myself. They slid under the covers, the city exhaled. The calendar still had 12 squares, still mostly empty, but tomorrow had a circle around it, fat and blue. Jordan turned off the light and said out loud, to no one, with no performance, it's time. The second morning didn't arrive like a sunrise. It arrived like an email with the subject line, urgent. At 8:03 a.m., Jordan's manager, Alicia, posted in the team channel. Heads up, major outage affecting several enterprise clients. We need all hands on deck for triage. Please claim a case and post updates hourly. The thread bloomed with typing dots, then messages stacking like plates. On it, claimed, investigating logs. The quiet rhythm Jordan had found yesterday, walk, ship, write, shuddered under the sudden weight of everything now. Jordan felt the old reflex rise, push breakfast, skip the walk, hunch into the chair and disappear beneath the avalanche. The sticky note on the fridge read, Win the morning, cheerful as a mascot. The one on the door said, keys, wallet, courage. 3 small objects that, together, felt like a spine. Jordan breathed, counted backward from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and made a bargain with the day. 10 minutes outside, no phone. Then come back and dive in. Not a rebellion, a contract. The air had a bite sharper than yesterday's, as if the city had set its jaw. Jordan walked fast, past the deli, past the bus stop, past the orange beanie guy whose dog, today wearing a blue bandana, trotted with even more secret knowledge. A garbage truck groaned to a halt. A worker swung a metal bin, shoulders moving like a metronome set to stubborn. The cold needled Jordan's cheeks until thoughts thinned to a narrow beam. Step, step, step. 10 minutes later, the beam was steady enough to aim. Back at the desk, Jordan fired up the laptop, claimed 2 cases, and opened the runbook. The outage was a glitch in a third-party authentication service. Login tokens expiring early and refusing to refresh. The fix required patience, and patience required posture, and posture required a body that had been outside the building already today. Jordan composed the first update to a client named Midwest FinServ. The rep on their end, a woman named Trina, had sent 3 messages in 30 minutes, the last one ending with, "We're losing time and credibility." Jordan felt a pang, recognition, not defensiveness. They wrote, "Trina, I hear you. Here's where we are. We've identified the token refresh failure tied to Authco's US East cluster. We're working with their support to reissue tokens. In the meantime, there's a temporary workaround. Manual logout login to force a fresh token. It's clunky, but it'll get your team back in. I'll update you every 30 minutes until this is fully resolved." Trina responded 2 minutes later. "Thanks for being clear about the workaround. Rolling it out now." The update landed like a thud on the "ship one meaningful task" line. Not the glamorous shipping Jordan imagined yesterday, but real, a small sandbag on the floodline. At 11:06 a.m., Alicia pinged Jordan privately. "You've got a good tone with customers. Can you draft a template for the team? We need consistent messaging." Jordan's fingers already moved. The template wasn't poetry, but it was architecture, the kind that holds up a roof when weather arrives sideways. While writing, Jordan noticed something. Systems were not only for mornings and word counts. Systems were language too. Clear, steady, repeatable. By 12:20 p.m., the emergency stopped being urgent and softened into important. The vendor pushed a fix to their cluster. Tokens stopped sulking and refreshed like obedient students returning from recess. Slack's heartbeat slowed. People in the thread started adding emojis again. Green checks, relieved faces, a scattering of pizzas. Jordan made a turkey sandwich again. The habit wasn't about turkey. It was about removing one decision from the pile, so there was room for better ones. Jordan texted Maya to confirm Saturday coffee. "High noon cafe?" Maya wrote. "Their lattes slap." Jordan laughed out loud alone in the kitchen, surprised by the way joy sometimes arrived without knocking.
Afternoon thinned out into tidy tasks, closing tickets, writing follow-up notes, documenting what the team had learned. While logging the post-mortem, Jordan paused over a sentence. Root cause, dependency failure. The phrase felt bigger than the outage. Jordan scribbled it on a post-it and stuck it above the desk. Where else in my life is the root cause a dependency failure? Waiting for motivation. Waiting for permission. Waiting for the right time. Jordan tapped the post-it. Noted. At 5:40 p.m., a message from Evan arrived. Senior product designer, quiet, kind eyes behind round glasses, the person Jordan respected more than they admitted. "Hey, saw your template. It was clean. If you ever want to chat about the product side, I'm happy to share how we think through problems." The text sat there like a door slightly ajar. Jordan's thumbs hovered, then landed. "I'd love that. I'm exploring product/design. Could use a map." Evan's 3 dots pulsed. Then, "Cool. Bring questions. We'll make a mini-map together." At 6:57 p.m., the sky over the lake turned the color of a bruised peach. Jordan's stomach negotiated dinner. Stir-fry from the pan, not the app. While the vegetables hissed, Jordan opened the novel doc and reread last night's paragraph. The Ferris wheel hung mid-air in a sentence, its lights blinking like signals in fog. Tonight the words did not come like water. They came like lint you pull from the dryer, one soft thread at a time. Jordan's brain offered a compromise, 100 words instead of 200. The sticky note on the mirror didn't blink. Jordan smiled grimly. Nice try. They set a timer for 15 minutes and typed. A girl in the story, Elena, tucked a coin in her pocket and counted the metal's weight all night. A stray dog barked at the empty carnival, then lay down by a neon sign and watched the dark the way dogs do, with an opinion. The Ferris wheel creaked once, the sound like a door remembering a promise. The timer chimed, and the word count read 248. It was not beautiful, but it was there. After, Jordan stretched on the living room rug. hamstrings protesting like union workers. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a number Jordan didn't recognize. Denver, Colorado, beneath it. Jordan's chest did that strange, tight, loose thing it does around family. They answered. "Hey, it's me," Caleb said, Jordan's little brother, voice deeper than it had any right to be. In the background, a dog barked, then a microwave beeped. "Hey, you!" Jordan's mouth remembered the shape of teasing and tried it on. "You call for my Netflix password? Because you can't have it." Caleb laughed. "No, I got my own. Adult money. Anyway, just checking in. You were quiet last week." Jordan told him about the 3x3, about the walk, about 200 words that felt like 200 bricks in a tiny, stubborn house. Caleb listened the way a good lake listens, taking the sound and giving it back calmer. "Proud of you," he said, not dramatic. "You always were better when you were building something." After they hung up, Jordan stood in the living room with the light off. The refrigerator hummed like a white noise machine for thoughts. The day had pressed hard in the morning and softer by evening. It had bent because Jordan had bent first, taking 10 minutes to walk, being clear in writing, honoring a tiny writing time even when the brain grumbled.
Reduce noise. Before bed, Jordan added to Project Change. Daily non-negotiables. Check. Walked. Check. Shipped. Check. Wrote. Weekly moves. Texted Maya. Relationships. Tidied desk. Environment. Set auto transfer. $25 to savings every Friday. Finances. Monthly leap. Draft. Scheduled 2 chats. Evan, product. Community Center Director, volunteer. Then on a new page, a question. What will I do when the system breaks? Because it would. The future had potholes. Sick days, bad news, overtime, temptation, the gravity of old habits dressed in new clothes. Jordan drew a tiny triangle and labeled its sides, fallback, floor, friend. Fallback. If the walk isn't possible, stretch for 5 minutes. If 200 words won't come, write 50 bad ones or outline a scene in bullet points. If shipping at work stalls, move one thing forward by 1 inch. Floor. The absolute minimum still counts. A floor keeps you inside the house when a storm blows the door open. Friend. Text one person who knows the project. Rough day. Checking in. Kept my floor. Jordan closed the laptop, teeth brushed, lights out, body like a tuning fork that had been struck, but now quiet. In the hallway, someone's radio played a low Motown song. It curled under the door and into the room like a cat. Jordan smiled into the dark. The day didn't end heroic. It ended honest. Systems weren't drama. They were a kindness future you leaves on present you's doorstep. The knock wasn't loud tonight. It was the soft sound of a checkmark. Friday arrived with a pale sun and the smell of wet sidewalks. Jordan awoke before the alarm and watched light creep along the edges of the blinds like a promise sidling into the room. The quiet felt earned. For a moment, Jordan lay still and listened to the building, the neighbor above rolling a chair, the groan of pipes, the elevator's throat clearing as someone headed down to the street. Somewhere between those sounds, Jordan felt the new ritual take root. Walk, ship, write, and recognized the strange pleasure of predictability that wasn't boring, just steady. Outside, the air had traded its bite for a clean chill that pinched the nose and cleared the mind. Jordan took the familiar route, counting the blocks, not as distance, but as a metronome beating the morning into shape. A bakery worker propped the door open. Warmth and the smell of butter slipped out onto the sidewalk and wrapped the block. On the lake, the water was flat like a sheet of slate. 10 minutes later, Jordan's shoulders had dropped from their defensive shrug, and the day looked less like an adversary and more like a partner. By mid-morning, a calendar alert blinked to life. Evan had sent it last night. Product chat. 11:30. Small conference B. The company's office days were optional, but Jordan had taken the train in, riding the rattle and sway with a notebook open on their lap. The notebook's cover read, Project Change, in block letters that had been traced over twice, so the lines looked intentional. Jordan took a breath at the building's revolving door, the kind of breath you take before a dive.
Conference B had a round table, glass walls, and a view of the river, scarfed with sunlight. Evan was already there, sketching on a yellow legal pad with the calm concentration of a person who enjoys exactly what they're doing. He looked up, smiled in that unhurried way he had, and gestured to a chair. "I read your outage template again," he said, once they'd settled. "You made a messy situation legible. That's design." Jordan laughed softly. "It was just words." Evan tapped the pencil on the pad. "Words are interface too. So tell me, what are you hoping to change?" Jordan worked the answer like a knot. "I'm tired of living on accident. I want to move into product and design, and I want to finish a novel I've started and abandoned 12 different ways. I'm trying to build a system so it isn't just dependent on how I feel." Evan nodded, as if he'd expected that exact answer and was pleased to receive it anyway. He drew a rectangle. "Here's how I think about change," he said. "Map, mirror, and margin." He labeled the rectangle MAP. A map is the set of problems you're trying to solve, and the constraints around them. No wishful thinking. What's real? What resources exist? Where you can't go yet? He drew a small circle and wrote mirror. The mirror is identity. Who you are when nobody's applauding. What you believe about yourself. What you call yourself when you're alone. Finally, he shaded space around both shapes and wrote margin. Margin is slack, breathing room. The time and cash and energy you leave unallocated so you don't shatter when the day hits a bump. Jordan watched the shapes settle on the paper and felt something in their chest mirror the lines. "I've been trying to do map without mirror. I keep thinking I'll become the person once I stack enough wins, but most days I still call myself an amateur trying not to get caught." Imposter syndrome is just a nervous system rehearsing old data. You don't beat it with slogans, you train it with evidence. That's what your daily promises are. I like those. Small, non-negotiable, observable. Keep them, and your system becomes the proof your brain needs. Jordan took out the notebook. "I've been using a 3x3. 3 daily non-negotiables, 3 weekly moves, 3 monthly leaps. I'm trying not to make the numbers heroic, just automatic." "Good," Evan said. "You need boring. Boring is how bridges hold. Now let's map the move into product. Why do you want it?" "Because I like solving problems. Because when I'm writing a ticket response or documenting a process, I feel closer to the inside of the machine. Because I want to design the sequence, not just mop after it." Out loud, Jordan said, "I like how design thinks. Systems, trade-offs, effects on real people. It feels like writing, but the draft is a thing you can touch." Evan smiled. "Design is narrative with constraints. Let's get specific. What work can you do in your current role that looks like product?" They listed the features Jordan already touched at the edges, clarifying user pain in tickets, pattern spotting repeated bugs, drafting better microcopy for error messages,
writing internal documentation that made sense to people outside the team. Evan drew lines between the list and another box labeled Portfolio. "Give yourself 30 days," he said. "Document 3 stories. A support issue you noticed that led to a product suggestion, a set of error messages you rewrote with rationale and impact, and a small internal tool you scripted or spec'd to reduce friction. Don't wait for permission to start any of these. Get the stories right. Outcomes matter more than artifacts, but show both. Then we'll shape them into a portfolio piece." Jordan's brain buzzed, not from caffeine, from alignment. The map was beginning to exist on paper and not just in the nervous imagining behind the eyes. Jordan remembered the post-it above the desk at home. Root cause, dependency, failure. This felt like the opposite. This felt like independence assembling its toolkit. Evan put down the pencil. Now, the mirror. "What do you call yourself right now?" Jordan stared at the legal pad. A support rep who wants to be a designer and is writing a novel at the pace of a glacial apology. Evan grinned despite himself. "Okay, let's adjust the tense. You are a support specialist who practices product thinking daily and is completing a first novel draft by writing every night. Small distinction, huge effect. Identity follows verbs." The words loosened something tight in Jordan's throat. Identity follows verbs. Maybe that was what the last 2 days had been. A shift in syntax. Not, "I am trying," but "I practice." Not, "I hope," but "I build." They worked for another 20 minutes on the margin piece, which turned out to be the hardest. Jordan admitted that money stress kept humming in the background like a fluorescent light. Rent, groceries, train fare, the emergency fund that looked like it was embarrassed to be called a fund at all. Evans suggested a boring but forgiving budget and a weekly money check-in that took 20 minutes, on Sundays, maximum. Leave space for error. Put a margin in the calendar labeled "nothing" and respect it like a meeting with a person you love. Jordan wrote it all down, slightly suspicious of the word boring and slightly in love with it. When the meeting ended, Evans slid the legal pad page across the table. "Take the map. Text me when you have a first pass at those 3 portfolio stories. We'll iterate." Jordan held the page like a small passport. The glass walls threw the river back in slivers. It was almost noon. The day stretched. Work moved. The office air whispered like it always did, climate-controlled and faintly perfumed with coffee. Jordan returned to their corner desk and found a new ticket blinking in the queue. A user named Clark discovered a UX edge case that let him back into a view he shouldn't have accessed. Jordan walked the steps, confirmed the issue, captured a quick screen recording, and wrote clear repro steps that any engineer could follow. Then Jordan paused, and remembering the portfolio conversation, added a short paragraph that read like a designer speaking to designers. "Here's the mental model the user had. Here's the part of our flow that violates it. And here's a lightweight fix that might restore the expected path without adding friction elsewhere." It felt audacious to write it. It also felt accurate. Jordan hit send and sat back, feeling the click of a gear that had been searching for its teeth. At lunch, a message from Maya chimed in. "Tomorrow at noon, High Noon Cafe." Jordan typed a thumbs up and then backspaced because habit. A simple "yes" sounds more like a person. "Yes, looking forward. I've got a lot to tell you." Maya replied with a single word: "Good." Afternoon shadows lengthened in the office, and with them came the familiar lull where the brain tries to bargain for distraction. Jordan stood, refilled water, and walked one lap around the floor. On the way back, their manager Alicia intercepted them near the kitchen. "I liked how you handled Midwest Fine Serve yesterday. That's what leadership looks like when it's not wearing a name tag." Jordan thanked her and felt the compliment land in a new place, not on the surface where praise slicks off, but somewhere weight-bearing. The train ride home was a small ceremony. Seat by the window, headphones without music, notebook on the lap again. The city sliding past like a flipbook of ordinary grace. A pair of teenagers argued about which superhero could beat which in a fight that sounded like philosophy. A woman in a red scarf slept with her mouth open and looked relieved to be off the clock. Jordan wrote 3 lines about Elena and the Ferris wheel, then closed the notebook and simply watched the river flash between buildings. At home, the apartment smelled like last night's stir-fry, plus the faint metallic note of radiator heat. Jordan changed into soft clothes and stood at the window until it felt like the body had arrived fully in the room. The evening had 2 pieces: ship something at work that mattered, and write 200 words. The first was done. The second waited like a quiet dog, tail thumping, patient but hopeful. The first sentence fought. Jordan tried one approach, then another, like testing doorknobs in a hallway. Finally, the sentence arrived. Elena counted the coins not to pay for the ride, but to measure time, each circle of metal a minute she could hold. The paragraph unfolded, not shapely yet, but alive. The Ferris wheel had a maintenance man named Roy, who talked to the machinery as if it were an old friend with a stubborn streak. A storm gathered somewhere outside the town's borders and sent its rumor ahead in the form of a wind that made the bulbs flicker. 206 words. Jordan stopped on purpose, the way a runner stops 1 block early so tomorrow has somewhere to go. Later, while washing a pan, Jordan's phone buzzed. Evan again. Quick note. That bug report you wrote? Engineering flagged it as the best one they saw today. Keep doing exactly that. Jordan leaned on the counter and let the sentence soak in. Evidence. The system was writing the story in the nervous system's language. Night pooled at the edges of the apartment. Jordan turned off lamps, left the kitchen light for last, and stood in the doorway looking at the sticky notes as if they were small lighthouses in a modest harbor. Win the morning. 200 words equal done. Keys, wallet, courage. The mirror in the hallway still reflected the same face, but the posture, again, had changed a degree. It's a barely visible thing, posture, until it isn't, until one day you realize you no longer fit into the space carved by your old slump.
Before bed, Jordan opened the Project Change document and added a new page titled The Map and the Mirror. Underneath, in plain text, went the 3 portfolio stories to start gathering, the Sunday money check-in, the reminder to leave margin on purpose. At the bottom, Jordan typed a sentence and then read it out loud so the room could hear it too. Identity follows verbs. Tomorrow, I practice again. Sleep came without a chase, and somewhere between waking and dreaming, Jordan found the particular quiet that comes not from nothing happening, but from the right things happening in the right order, small and steady, like steps that know the way even when the sky hasn't told them yet. Saturday drew its outline in soft gray, then filled itself in with color as the morning advanced. Jordan's building was quieter than on weekdays, the elevator resting between floors like a cat in a sun patch. The walk came first, not out of obligation now, but out of rhythm. Chicago felt half asleep, block by block, stretching awake. A jogger in a college sweatshirt nodded. A mail carrier rolled a cart that squeaked a small, persistent complaint. And somewhere a saxophone warmed scales that felt like rain turned into sound. 10 minutes expanded into 15 without anyone voting on it.
When Jordan headed back, the smell of cinnamon rolls braided the air outside the bakery and nearly rerouted the day, but the line was long and the plan was set: coffee with Maya at noon. At 11:47, Jordan pushed open the door of High Noon Cafe, that momentary hush of entry letting the clatter and hiss of espresso machines reassert themselves a beat later. High Noon had rough wood tables, a chalkboard menu written by a hand that loved loops, and a neon sign on the far wall that read, "Make it count." It glowed the way neon does, simultaneously earnest and ironic. Maya was already there, a coat slung over the back of her chair, dark hair tucked behind one ear, the posture of a person who reads people for a living and still chooses to like them. "You look taller," she said as Jordan approached. "Not physically, just more vertical." "Posture," Jordan said, half laughing. "New hobby." They ordered, latte for Maya, black coffee for Jordan, and fell into the ease that only certain friendships know, the kind that rises up like a dock under your feet. Maya worked in nonprofit housing advocacy and had a way of speaking that made sentences sound like they had good shoes on them. She listened the same way Evan did, with attentiveness that didn't perform itself. Jordan told her about the 3x3, about the walks, about the outage and the clean way it finally resolved, about Evan's map and mirror. Maya asked short questions that made answers longer and truer. When Jordan mentioned the novel and the Ferris wheel, and the girl named Elena who counted coins to measure time, Maya smiled with a quiet pride that sharpened the room into focus. "You know," Maya said, cupping her latte like warmth could be held and transferred, "you've always been a systems person trapped in a chaos habit." Jordan blinked. "That's rude." "It's affectionate," Maya said, amused. "You like building frameworks because they give you something to push against and through. When you don't have a framework, you invent drama to replace it."
Jordan didn't argue, because the sentence landed with the accuracy of a thrown ring slipping neatly over a bottle's neck. They both watched people come and go. A pair of nurses in scrubs sharing a croissant, a man with a heavy backpack and a lighter expression, a dad with a toddler who laughed from the belly, embarrassingly pleased with the world. "What about money?" Maya asked softly, like a nurse assessing a bruise. "You're okay." "Not floating, not sinking, just waiting," Jordan said, trying for levity and landing somewhere more honest. Evan suggested a Sunday check-in. "Boring is good. I'm experimenting with boring." "Boring is sanctuary," Maya said. "It's where your nervous system stops scanning the horizon for wolves." A group at the next table burst into a joke's laughter. The neon sign hummed a little. Outside, a bus sighed itself to a stop. Jordan realized that, for the first time in a while, the moment didn't feel like a placeholder between more important moments. It was allowed to be itself, whole. "Tell me one thing you'll do this week that future you will thank you for," Maya asked. Jordan thought, "I'm going to email the director at the community center about volunteering on Thursday nights. Reading, homework help, something steady. That place used to anchor me. I think it could again." Maya's nod was gentle approval. "Text me when you do. I'll be your witness." They wandered to other subjects the way people in old neighborhoods drift down familiar streets. Her latest case pushing for more units in a building that wanted to go luxury only. A podcast Jordan had liked about attention as a muscle. A small confession about the loneliness that sneaks in around the edges, even when the calendar looks full. Maya didn't prescribe. She didn't dismiss. She carried the conversation with both hands. When noon's light leaned toward afternoon, they walked out together. The wind had prepared its own opinion about January,
but kept it polite. At the corner, Maya hugged Jordan, a firm, bracing thing. "I like you when you're building. You in motion is my favorite you." On the train home, Jordan sat by the window and didn't look at the phone. The city scrolled. Murals, a soccer field iced at the edges, a dog in a yard barking like the day had offended it. On the opposite bench, a teenager practiced a deck of cards, flipping and bridging them, turning plastic into waterfall. Jordan watched with open admiration, and the kid, noticing, smiled. "It's all repetition," he said, as if picking up a thread of conversation they'd been having for years. "The hands get smarter than your head." Back in the apartment, the afternoon yawned, a space that could be lost or used. Jordan set a timer, not for writing but for tidying. 20 minutes, and the desk shrugged off its archaeological layers. Pens that had rolled away from purpose were returned, bills sorted, notebooks stacked into a modest hill with the slope of intent. The apartment felt a degree larger just because surfaces reclaimed themselves. A text arrived from Caleb with a photo of his dog, Moose, wearing an absurd sweater that made him look like a professor, recently tenure-tracked, and therefore smug. "Hike this morning," the caption read. "Moose approves the weather." Jordan snorted, took a picture of the desk and sent it back. "Adulting this morning. My desk approves of verticality." The 3 dots appeared, then, "Proud of you." Also, "Moose ate a sock." Evening sat down early, as it does in winter, widening the dark not as a threat, but as a room you can arrange to your liking. Jordan brewed tea and placed the Project Change notebook open to a fresh page. Tomorrow would be the first Sunday money check-in, but today was for something else. Evan's suggestion about portfolio stories had been rattling around all day like a coin in a dryer. Jordan opened the work laptop and pulled up the bug ticket from yesterday, the one with the edge case navigation. The report was good. It could be better. Jordan added a section titled User Mental Model, then wrote it simply, like a friend explaining a system to a friend. Another section, Proposed Adjustment, named a fix that was small enough to be feasible and clear enough to test. Jordan exported a PDF and dropped it into a folder labeled Portfolio Drafts, as if this were a normal thing people do when they're changing their lives, because it is. On the stovetop, a pot of chili strengthened itself. The room took on the smell of cumin and tomatoes, and the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with degrees. After dinner, the novel's document waited. Jordan's eyes were tired, and the couch argued for surrender. But the rule wasn't tyranny, it was trust. 200 words is a small covenant. Jordan set the timer and stepped into the carnival again. Elena met Roy, the maintenance man, under the Ferris wheel, where the sigh of metal sounded almost like a living thing. Roy told her the story of the wheel's first night, how the lights refused to align until someone flipped the breakers in the right order, and suddenly the whole town thought the stars had come down for a closer look. Elena didn't smile easily, but she smiled at that. Outside the fence, wind spun a napkin up, white and fluttering, an accidental flag. The timer rang and Jordan stopped mid-sentence on purpose because leaving a door half open makes it easier to walk through tomorrow. After the words, something slowed. Jordan washed dishes slowly, not as chore, but as a series of gestures that marked the day's end. Water on, plate rinsed, plate dried, plate shelved. The phone stayed face down, the TV stayed off. Jordan sat on the floor and stretched again, hamstrings a little less mutinous than earlier in the week. The body was not an afterthought. It was the machine that carried the mind to its appointments. Before bed, Jordan drafted the email to the community center director. The subject line read, Thursday Volunteer Inquiry. The body was short and plain. Availability, a note about past experience, and a willingness to do the unglamorous tasks that keep real places running. Jordan didn't send it. Not yet. The plan was to review it with fresh eyes in the morning and hit send with coffee. In the notebook, under a line drawn straight with a ruler's edge, Jordan wrote Saturday's ledger. Walked, met Maya, tidied, wrote, prepared. None of it would look impressive from far away. From here, it looked like a house acquiring walls.
Reduce noise. Lights out. The building breathed. Somewhere, a radiator clicked. The neon from the cafe sign made a gentle cameo, in memory. Make it count. It didn't feel like a command anymore. It felt like a description of what had just happened in small, repeatable ways. Sunday morning carried a particular stillness, like the city had turned down its volume so people could hear their own pencils. Jordan woke to light not yet fully formed and let it spread across the ceiling before moving. The walk came first because that is how days decide their shape. Outside, the sidewalks were dusted with last night's polite snow, a thin white that made shoe prints look like signatures. The lake wore a skim of ice at the edges. Gulls skated along it in clumsy, determined arcs that made Jordan laugh under their breath. 10 minutes became 12 because the air was sharp enough to file the edges off thought. And when Jordan turned back toward the building, the snow on the stoop recorded a simple fact. This is where the day began. Back in the kitchen, coffee steamed in the mug that had become the Sunday mug by the mysterious logic of repetition. Today was the first real test of Evan's counsel, a boring, forgiving money check-in with a time limit. Jordan set a 20-minute timer, opened a spreadsheet labeled Ledger, and took a breath that felt like an apology and a promise. Numbers are not moral, they are measurements. That sentence, copied from a podcast and taped above the desk, steadied the hands. Jordan listed the accounts, the due dates, the automatic transfers that would move $25 each Friday from checking to the humble emergency fund. Rent already paid, utilities scheduled, a credit card with a balance that looked irritated but not furious, groceries tracked in round sums. The timer ticked. Jordan built a small weekly plan, a cash envelope for miscellaneous spending, 2 meals cooked in batches, 1 night for the cheaper joy of a library book instead of a streaming impulse. 10 minutes in, a wave of dread lifted, like a curtain letting in colder, truer light. 15 minutes in, Jordan found $27 worth of subscriptions that had outlived their usefulness and canceled them with the ceremonial satisfaction of deleting a sentence that never belonged. At 19 minutes, Jordan clicked Save and closed the tab on purpose. Margin remained. The email to the community center sat in drafts like a seed waiting for water. Jordan read it once, trimmed a sentence that tried too hard, and hit send. The small swoosh sound was silly and also exactly right. A minute later, a server auto-reply confirmed receipt. Nothing more would come today, maybe tomorrow, but the act was complete. The ball passed into motion. Jordan added a line to Project Change. Volunteer inquiry sent. It looked like nothing. It felt like a doorbell rung at the right house. Late morning, a text from Alicia landed. A gentle reminder to log notes for last week's incident review. Jordan smiled at the timing. Systems everywhere, wanting to be fed. They toggled open the document and documented the outage in straightforward prose. The moment stress spiked. Who owned what? How the team pivoted when the vendor pushed a fix. And the simple sentence that mattered most to future people who would read this. Clear, predictable updates reduced client panic more than any particular technical detail. Jordan wrote that line and felt the resonance ring through other parts of life. Clear, predictable updates reduce internal panic too. The brain is a client. Treat it like one. Around noon,
The apartment asked for small maintenance. Jordan obliged. Plants watered. Windows cracked for a bracing 5 minutes. Sheets stripped and remade, so the bed became a clean slate for the week's sleep.
A light bulb over the stove that had been threatening to quit finally did. Jordan replaced it without delay. There is a quiet pleasure in not postponing the inevitable. As they worked, Jordan thought about Evan's trio: map, mirror, margin, and recognized that housekeeping was a kind of margin, a reclaiming of space where friction might otherwise accumulate like grit. After lunch, Jordan positioned the notebook and work laptop side by side and began to assemble the first of the portfolio stories. The edge case navigation bug was fresh, its details within reach. Jordan wrote the story as a narrative instead of a report. A user named Clark attempted a restricted flow, expected one thing, experienced another, and here is why that mattered to his trust. Between paragraphs, Jordan pasted screenshots and annotations, arrows, short labels, never more text than was needed to keep a smart reader moving. A section titled Outcomes named what changed. Engineering shipped a small fix. Support calls on that issue dropped. The copy on the modal now matched the mental model of the path. Jordan reread the piece and trimmed it again. Whenever a sentence tried to announce its intelligence, Jordan cut it by half. Outcomes over adjectives. By mid-afternoon, the first story sat in a folder with a plain name and a revision number that suggested this would not be the last pass. That pleased Jordan more than a false sense of finality ever had. The novel waited like a faithful appointment. Today, the words arrived with the stubbornness of wet firewood. Jordan's fingers hovered over the keys longer than they had on other days, and the first sentence felt like pushing a stalled car. The trick, learned already and learned again, was to start where resistance was lowest. Jordan wrote a list instead of a paragraph. Things Elena notices in the carnival after the wheel stops. A moth stuck inside the glass of a bulb, batting itself silly. The way Roy scratches his beard with a matchbook so the cardboard makes a soft rasp. The smell of metal that is almost taste. A child's abandoned mitten at the foot of the fence, too small, too red. The list became a paragraph almost without permission. The paragraph became 214 words, saved, timer stilled. Not a day for music, a day for metronome. That counted. Sometime later, when the light outside angled toward evening, Jordan's phone chimed with a Denver area code. Caleb again, but this time with a link. It was a local news article about a community snowstorm response where neighbors checked on older residents and cleared sidewalks. In the photo, Caleb's absurdly sweatered dog, Moose, wore a new bow on his collar and leaned against the leg of a woman in a parka whose smile was the kind that makes you want to commit to being the sort of person who causes it in strangers. Caleb's text underneath was spare. Took 2 hours, felt like a day with good bones. Jordan looked at the photo and understood the quiet thesis. Service is a structure you can climb when your own house is still under construction. Late afternoon brought a small ambush. A social media notification bloomed on Jordan's phone with a highlight reel of a former classmate's visible success. New job, new house, a vacation that looked like a postcard bragging. Envy sprung with embarrassing speed. Jordan watched it happen, noted the posture change, the breath hitch, the brain rewinding into an old, unhelpful comparison. The system asked for a response, not a lecture. Jordan kept the phone face down, stood, and did the smallest possible reset. A glass of water, 3 slow breaths at the window, a glance at the sticky note on the front door. Keys, wallet, courage.
The words looked almost comically unrelated to the pang of envy, but they were not unrelated. Courage here meant returning attention to the work at hand, without punishing the self for being human. Jordan returned to the desk and reopened the portfolio story. found a sentence that rambled and made it plain. The pang faded as if asked to leave calmly by staff trained for that kind of exit. Dinner was leftover chili, better the second day as some things are, and a heel of bread toasted to crackle. Jordan ate standing at the counter, not in a rush, but in a mood that didn't require ceremony. After dishes, a brief stretch routine. The body reported minor improvements: hamstrings less theatrical in their protest, back less welded into a desk arc. The floor felt like a friend who lets you sprawl and tell the truth. In the quiet that followed, an email arrived. Subject: thanks for reaching out. The sender: Lydia Martinez, Director of Programs, Lakeview Community Center. Jordan opened it and felt the way time can swallow when a message matters. Lydia thanked Jordan for the note, remembered their name from years back when they'd helped wrangle a chaotic art class into something resembling a community, and invited them to a Thursday orientation at 6 p.m. She warned that volunteers did a lot of humble tasks: stacking chairs, photocopying worksheets, sitting with frustrated kids while they did fractions and wished math were a person they could argue into reason. If that sounded like the right kind of work, she'd be glad to have Jordan back in the building. Jordan read the email twice and felt a steadiness settle behind the ribs. Humble, yes. Right, also yes. They replied with unadorned gratitude and a calendar confirmation. Evening thickened into its true shape. Jordan reviewed the week ahead with the light touch of a person who has learned not to plan every minute. Walks each morning, ship something meaningful daily, write 200 words nightly, meet Evan on Wednesday to review the first portfolio story, Thursday orientation at the community center. A placeholder block labeled Nothing sat on Tuesday evening, the margin baked in by decision rather than accident. Jordan closed the calendar and let the list sit inside their mind the way a map sits in a glove compartment, available, not clutched. Before bed, the ledger called for a brief postscript. Jordan opened it and wrote one line in a notes field that might never be read by anyone else. Today I paid attention instead of paying interest on avoidance. It was a joke only to Jordan, but the math checked out. The count of kept promises grew by 3. Lights off. The room held the day like a bowl holds water, still reflecting. Somewhere, a snowplow passed, its scrape a long metallic sentence. The city's pulse kept time. Jordan lay on their back, looked at the ceiling, and thought about the difference between aspiration and practice. Aspiration inflates a balloon. Practice ties the knot so it holds shape. The weekend had been less about dramatics and more about knots, secure enough to lift. Monday began with a small betrayal. The alarm went off, and Jordan, confident in the new rhythm, tapped snooze as if it were a harmless comma instead of a period. 90 seconds became 9 minutes. 9 minutes became another cycle. When Jordan finally sat up, the room had the sallow, late-morning light that announces you've already bargained away your best hour. A siren threaded the street outside. The radiator ticked like it was counting. The sticky note on the fridge, "Win the morning," looked less like encouragement and more like an indictment. For a beat, the brain rehearsed an old script with an eager understudy's energy. You blew it. The streak is broken. Might as well start over tomorrow. Jordan stood barefoot on the kitchen tile and let the cold argue with the script. The triangle from last week appeared in the mind with the clarity of a diagram drawn in a book you actually studied. Fallback, floor, friend. If the walk isn't possible, stretch for 5 minutes. The floor counts. Text someone who knows the project. Jordan set a timer and did a slow, awkward ritual of motion. Neck rolls, shoulder circles, a forward fold that admitted the hamstrings were still litigating the terms of this new life. 5 minutes became 7. Breath brightened. The streak, such as it was, bent but didn't break.
At the desk, the workday had already started without Jordan's permission. Slack churned at a civilized clip rather than a crisis one. Alicia pinged the group with the week's priorities and a note about an internal audit of help center articles that had aged into confusion while nobody watched. There was also a quiet, intriguing message from Evan asking whether Jordan might want to sit in on a midweek user interview with the product team. Jordan answered the ordinary things first: acknowledgments, status, then wrote Evan back with a yes that felt steadier than excitement. The map was sprouting a footpath. By mid-morning, the audit proved itself to be the kind of work that can either make you hate your job or remind you why it matters. The articles had been drafted by a dozen hands over a dozen months, and their voices didn't agree with each other or with reality. Jordan opened one and read it aloud, then another, and began to mark them with a surgeon's calm. Here the steps were in the wrong order. Here a noun and a verb needed to get married. Here a screenshot showed a button that had changed its name and was now misleading users like a friend who can't keep a secret. Jordan rewrote without flourish, the way you clean a window so people can see what they came to see. Around 11, a reply from engineering landed on last week's edge case report. The message was courtesy itself, but carried the small heat of a disagreement. The fix Jordan had proposed, a tiny change in the guardrail of the flow, would ripple into a corner of the system that handled permissions, and the engineer, a person named Ravi with a facility for caveats, was worried about unintended consequences. For a second, Jordan felt the shame flash of being out of lane. The second ended. The air returned. Jordan reread Ravi's points, admitted their validity, and wrote back in the clean tone Evan had praised, "Thanks for the clarity. Here's a revised suggestion that respects the permission model and still aligns the user's mental map with the interface. Let's test it behind a flag." The reply back was a green check and a sentence that didn't say approval but felt like it. Lunch was hurried, on purpose rather than by accident. A sandwich, an apple, a careful absence of doom-scrolling. Jordan stood at the window and watched the January sun clip the tops of buildings like a barber doing quick work. The guilt of the late start had quieted into data. The system did not require heroics. It required a willingness to resume. That felt like a private victory large enough to fit in a pocket.
Early afternoon brought a small meeting with Alicia about the Help Center refresh. She'd noticed Jordan's edits and asked for a short plan to bring the rest of the library up to the same standard. The meeting took place in a huddle room with a window that faced another building's brick, but Alicia had a way of making even bland spaces feel like they contained weather. She listened, asked what resources would make the job straightforward rather than Sisyphean, and offered a simple, unexpected currency: autonomy. If Jordan drafted a style guide for the Help Center, tone, sequence, screenshot conventions, examples, Alicia would back it and assign time from one of the technical writers to move it through. Something in Jordan's posture adjusted a degree. Style guides are stories with rules. The work felt adjacent to design, because it was. Back at the desk, the style guide began to exist. Jordan wrote the first principles as plainly as possible. Speak as if you're talking to a smart friend who is tired. Show before you tell. Put the success path at the top and the edge cases at the bottom. Replace adjectives with outcomes. Name buttons exactly how they appear. If a user needs to contact support, give them the path in a sentence short enough to carry in their head from the page to the app. The words were not lofty, they were useful. With each paragraph, Jordan felt the subtle, pleasing click of identity following verbs. In the middle of this good work, a moment of friction arrived with the personality of an uninvited guest who insists on staying.
A calendar reminder chimed. Dentist appointment at 4. The kind of logistical tripwire that can upend the end of a day if you let it. The appointment had been made months ago in a burst of responsible adulthood and now felt like it belonged to a different person. Jordan checked the to-do list, calculated, and decided to keep the appointment because the system wasn't only about effort, it was about maintenance. On the train down to the clinic, Jordan pulled out the notebook and did a quiet inventory of the day so far. The morning had slipped. The system had held. Work had offered an opening and Jordan had stepped through it without rehearsing gratitude or apology. The nervous system, that reliable archivist of old narratives, had been presented with new evidence. In the dentist's chair, the hygienist made the kind of friendly conversation that strangers do when one of them has tools in the other's mouth. She asked about work, about winter, about whether Jordan had any New Year's resolutions. Jordan, cheeks full of suction, managed a non-committal sound, then a shrug that, if translated, would have said, "I am not making resolutions, I am practicing something smaller and probably stronger." The hygienist laughed like she understood anyway and turned on the small TV mounted to the ceiling. A nature documentary played with the sound low. A fox trotting across snow, then stopping, then tilting its head to listen beneath the crust for the tiny, warm sounds of life. Jordan watched the fox leap and disappear into white, then emerge with something squirming and real in its mouth. The camera did not flinch. The fox looked like determination distilled into a body. Jordan felt, briefly and unexpectedly, encouraged by an animal that does not keep a calendar. Back home, late afternoon bled toward evening. The walk was gone. The train had taken that slot and filled it with its own kind of witness. The rule about shipping something at work had been honored. That left the smallest, sharpest edge of the day. 200 words. The couch whispered about how Monday is an exhausting sound, and the brain nodded in agreement. Jordan set a timer anyway and returned to the carnival.
Elena found Roy at the base of the Ferris wheel, staring up as if the structure might speak if addressed with the right combination of patience and profanity. He admitted to her that he'd once fallen asleep on the maintenance platform during a long night and woken to find the town below him arranged like a board game. From that height, he said, the straight streets curved, the stubborn buildings softened. The people turned into moving punctuation marks, each sentence a different urgency. Elena listened and turned a coin over in her palm, the metal warming to her skin like an animal getting tame. A wind came off the fields with the smell of snow in it, even if snow hadn't been invited. Roy promised nothing. Machines, he said, keep their own counsel. But he would climb and test and coax, because that's what you do when something that should move forgets how. The timer rang. Jordan stopped mid-breath, the way you hold a place in a book with a finger while you look up. Dinner was simple by design. Eggs scrambled soft, toast at the edge of brown, a few slices of tomato salted until they gave up their best selves. Jordan ate standing again, thinking about the phrase that had arrived via nature documentary and dentist chair. Determination distilled into a body. Practice looked like that from outside. From inside, it felt less noble and more matter-of-fact. You made the move in front of you, and then you made the next one. The distance between those two acts was where old stories tried to set up shop. Today, they hadn't succeeded. As the night settled, an email bubbled up from Evan confirming Wednesday's user interview and suggesting a brief prep call in the morning. He included a short reading list, 2 articles about asking better questions, and an excerpt from a book on interviews that made the case for silence as a tool. Jordan read them with a highlighter's appetite, then wrote a few practice prompts in the notebook. There was pleasure in imagining the conversation, not hunting for praise, but looking for friction, for needs that language hid and behavior revealed. The work of design had always tempted Jordan because it looked like listening with consequences. Before bed, Jordan logged a brief addendum into Project Change. The entry began with a confession of the snooze button and ended with a sentence that felt true enough to save. I did not win the morning. I won the recovery. The brain, that client who panics without updates, seemed to ease when presented with that line. The lamp clicked off. The building sighed. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor laughed, then caught themselves the way people do when they remember thin walls at the last second. Jordan lay still and watched the room soften into darkness and thought, not dramatically, just accurately. The day slipped and held both. Tomorrow would ask again. Jordan would answer in verbs. Tuesday broke clear and cold, the kind of morning that makes windows look like they are thinking. Jordan woke with the alarm instead of against it, and stood a moment at the edge of the bed, collecting self into body the way you gather a coat before stepping into weather. The walk found its shape quickly. Sidewalks salted and glittering, a delivery truck idling. A barista propping open a cafe door and releasing a ribbon of warmth into the air. 10 minutes outside arranged the day's furniture in Jordan's head. A brief prep with Evan, the afternoon user interview, edits on the Help Center guide, 200 words after dinner, no heroics. Back at the desk, Jordan boiled water, made plain oatmeal, and opened the 2 articles Evan had sent.
The first argued that most interviews fail, not because the questions are bad, but because the interviewer is in a hurry to prove something. The second described silence as a tool you hold like a lantern, close enough to see, far enough not to blind. Jordan underlined sentences with a pencil, an old habit that felt like handshakes with the text. Notes went into the Project Change notebook. Ask for stories, not opinions. Ask about last time, not someday. Ask for the steps, not the label on the steps. The distinction was small and profound. It reminded Jordan of the difference between identity and verbs. At 9, Evan called. He sounded like morning coffee, steady, not rushed. "We'll be talking to Paige," he said, ops lead at a mid-sized client. "She's practical and busy. Our goal is simple. Understand how she coordinates and where the friction is. We're not pitching. We're listening so hard we overhear the design." Jordan smiled at the phrasing and wrote it down. Overhear the design. They reviewed the plan. Evan would open, then hand to Jordan for a section focused on a specific workflow Paige had mentioned in an earlier email. Exporting weekly performance data for a scattered team, then wrangling it into a usable report. Jordan's job was to make the steps explicit without making Paige feel examined. They rehearsed one transition, not like actors performing, but like carpenters checking a joint. It clicked. Work inched forward until afternoon. The Help Center style guide continued to gather bones and muscle. The tone section now had simple before and after examples, the kind that argued for themselves without the need for adjectives. Alicia pinged a thumbs up and a note that the technical writer, Shirley, would get pulled in tomorrow. Jordan glanced at the calendar block labeled "Nothing on tonight" and left it alone. Margin felt like a quiet ally who didn't ask for thanks. At 2, the video call began. Evan's face on the screen looked as it always did, clear, composed, the eyes of someone who finds people interesting as a baseline. Paige joined from a fluorescent-lit office with a window that admitted winter's pale effort. Her hair was pulled back in the way of a person who needs no interference between her and the day. She smiled a professional smile that softened when Evan thanked her for the time and named specifically why her perspective mattered. People relax, Jordan thought, when the reason for their presence is handled with care. Evan began with two gentle questions about context, team size, weekly rhythms, then passed the conversation to Jordan with a nod so unshowy it felt like permission rather than a baton. Jordan greeted Paige again, asked how she liked to keep track of steps, page, checklists, and muscle memory. Then invited her to tell the story of last Thursday when she exported performance data and sent it to her regional managers. "Start at the beginning," Jordan said, "as if I'm your shadow, and only name the things you actually did." Paige laughed once, short and real, and began. She opened a particular page, chose a date range, ticked 3 boxes, waited for a spinner, watched it stall, cursed softly, switched browsers, tried again, downloaded a CSV, cleaned the columns because the headers were a mess, tossed out 2 fields that lied by virtue of being unclear, kept one mislabeled column because it secretly held the numbers the team cared about, pulled everything into a template she'd made 2 summers ago and had been duct taping ever since, and then emailed 4 versions of basically the same report to 4 managers who preferred different summaries. She spoke fast, not to impress, but to outrun the clock.
Jordan didn't interrupt. They asked narrow questions that only required short, precise answers. Which boxes? Which spinner? How long? Which headers? What did lied mean in this context? When did the template last change? What would break if the mislabeled column changed its name tomorrow? When Paige paused, Jordan let the pause exist. It lengthened into a detail Paige hadn't planned to share. Sometimes she opened the file, stared at it, and felt a hot, stupid anger at the columns because they ate a part of her morning that used to belong to thinking. The sentence hit the room with honesty's small sting. "What is the cost of that anger?" Jordan asked. Quiet. Paige tilted her head, surprised by the question, then answered without drama. "The cost is I don't mentor my new hire on Thursdays. I push it to Friday, and then Fridays are already full, so she gets the leftover me." Silence did its work. Evan's face shifted almost imperceptibly, something like care moving into place. Jordan pictured the phrase from this morning, "overhear the design," and heard the outline of it in Paige's sentence. Mislabeled columns, brittle exports, 4 versions of the same report, the hidden cost of stolen attention. Not features, friction. They kept going. Jordan asked for a screen share and watched Paige walk through the flow, capturing the tiny betrayals interfaces make when their makers assume users will be patient. A button moved because the page refreshed. A label promised one thing and delivered another. The CSV printed numbers with trailing spaces like petty graffiti. Jordan made notes not as complaints, but as a map. Here is where a person loses trust. Here is where they lose energy. Here is where they make a workaround and then mistake it for the way. When the hour ended, Evan thanked Paige specifically and simply, promised a summary back that would name what they heard, and did not say when they would fix it because he respected time and truth in the same way. After the call, Jordan and Evan stayed on for a debrief. They spoke in the careful language of people who want to make sure their excitement doesn't outrun their accuracy. Evan highlighted 3 moments. When Paige said the mislabeled column was secretly the only one she trusted, when she described switching browsers to coax the export, and when she admitted the cost to her new hire. That third one, Evan said, is the product story. Our work either gives people back thinking time or steals it. He asked Jordan to draft a 1-page narrative summarizing the interview: problem, evidence, user quote, friction points, and 2 possible ways to prototype relief without making more promises than they could keep. Write it as if you're talking to a smart colleague who didn't attend, Evan said. No theater, plain force. Jordan felt something settle, the way a picture frame rests level after you stop fussing with it. "I can do that," they said. And it wasn't bravado. It was a sentence built from verbs already performed: listening, noting, making plain. The rest of the afternoon slid into the help center again. With Paige's story still ringing, Jordan rewrote an article about exports with fresh eyes, removed a puffy paragraph that decorated rather than guided, moved the success path to the top, and added a single call-out box that explained how to verify column integrity without sounding like a scold.
When Shirley pinged hello from the technical writing team, their first exchange was easy, professional, and short, like neighbors agreeing on the location of a fence. Jordan sent her the style guide draft with the before and after examples and asked for ruthless edits. Ruthless arrived 20 minutes later, helpful and crisp. Collaboration felt like a clean wind. Evening approached without wait. The block labeled "Nothing" still sat in the calendar like a small park in a crowded city. Jordan kept it. After work, they walked, not for the checkbox, but for the air, letting the lake's dull winter glimmer do its trick on the nerves. Back home, dinner was soup and a salad with a vinaigrette Jordan whisked without thinking, a muscle memory from an earlier, cooking-obsessed year. The body ate and softened. The apartment exhaled. The novel waited. Jordan opened the document, aware that some nights the engine turns over reluctantly, some nights with a purr. Tonight landed between. The trick remained the same. Start where resistance is lowest and continue for 15 unheroic minutes. Elena followed Roy up the service ladder on the Ferris wheel, the iron cold under their palms. Halfway up, the wind outlined the shape of the town by the sounds it made moving through it: signs creaking, a loose shutter clapping its opinion, a dog complaining to no one. Roy showed Elena a switch panel the color of old teeth. He tapped one switch and said, "Order matters, not because the machine cares, but because everything else that touches the machine does." Elena didn't understand yet, but she recognized the tone of someone who had earned the right to be listened to by showing up in the rain. The timer chimed. Jordan stopped with one sentence half complete. A breadcrumb for tomorrow. There was one more task worth doing, and small enough to fit within margin. A draft of the interview summary for Evan. Jordan wrote it like a letter. Paige, Operations Lead, Thursday, Export. Friction points labeled and ranked. Quotes used sparingly and only where a number couldn't do the job. 2 modest prototype suggestions. Align labels to the mental model and allow a saved export profile that remembered the columns and formats Paige used every time, not the default the system preferred. Jordan ended with the sentence that had become a thesis. Our work either gives people back thinking time or steals it. They read the page aloud once and trimmed it until it went down without chewing. Then they sent it. The phone buzzed a few minutes later. "Evan, this is clear and strong. Add a note about the 4 audiences for the same report, and we'll take it to the PM tomorrow. Also, the line about thinking time is the right stake in the ground." Jordan added the note, saved the file, and closed the laptop without the usual reflex to check anything else. The day had already told them what needed telling. Before bed, Jordan opened Project, Change, and wrote a 3-line log. Daily non-negotiables. Walked, shipped, wrote. Weekly moves. Collaborated with Shirley. Prepped and ran interview. Monthly leap. First portfolio story drafted. Second story, interview summary, in motion. They added one more sentence because it felt like a hinge. Today I learned that silence is not absence, it is room for the truth to enter. The line looked slightly sentimental on the page, and perfectly accurate in the body. Lights off.
Reduce noise. The building settled like a book closing softly. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's microwave beeped with the particular melancholy of late dinners. Jordan lay on their side and tracked the arc of the day. Quiet morning, precise questions, a user's candor, work made plainer, words counted, margin respected. Change still refused the thunderclap. It arrived instead as a sequence you could rehearse until the nervous system believed you. Tomorrow would bring more steps, and some would land crooked. That was fine. Order mattered. Not because the machine cared, but because everything else that touched the machine did. Wednesday woke Jordan gently. The alarm settled into the room like a suggestion rather than a siren. The light outside had that clean winter clarity that makes the city look scrubbed. The walk shook the sleep from the joints and arranged the day into sequence. 10 minutes past the bakery's early heat. A crossing guard waving at nobody yet as if practice mattered. The lake lying still enough to take attendance of its own reflections. Jordan counted steps instead of thoughts and felt the nervous system take the hint. Back home, coffee, oatmeal, and a quick pass over yesterday's interview summary. Tightened a verb, softened a claim, then into the day. A calendar block at 10 read, "Debrief with PM." The PM was Priya Rao, new to Jordan as a direct collaborator, but not new to the company's rumor mill of competence. Evan sent a short message before the meeting. Keep it plain. Lead with the user's story. Let the evidence carry itself. Jordan reread the one-pager and resisted the urge to add cleverness. Outcomes over adjectives. It had become a kind of oath. At 10, the video grid arranged faces into their polite boxes. Evan nodded the conversation open. Priya had the look of someone who'd been in 3 meetings already and was still asking precise questions. Ravi joined too, camera off but present, and Shirley sat in as a courtesy since help center content would inevitably intersect the work. Jordan shared the summary and began not with a diagnosis but with pages Thursday. The export, the mislabeled column that secretly carried the truth. The browser swap to coax a spinner. The 4 audiences for 1 report, and the cost. Mentorship deferred. Thinking time stolen. Priya didn't interrupt. When Jordan finished, she asked the kind of question that respects your answer by aiming straight at the bone. If we changed nothing else, what is the smallest thing we could try that would give Paige back 10 minutes and cost us almost nothing to learn? Jordan exhaled once before answering. Rename the column so it aligns with what it actually is and allow saved export profiles that remember column selection and order, per user. We can flag it to a subset of accounts and watch for support volume, usage, and whether folks like Paige stop switching browsers or writing their own templates. Ravi came off mute. His voice had the careful edges of someone who's responsible for not breaking the important parts. Renaming carries risk if other flows are depending on that label. But we can alias it for a trial. Saved profiles are feasible if we keep the scope tight. No nested logic, just a list of columns and sort order. We can hide it behind a toggle and measure. Priya nodded once, a small seal of approval. Good. Draft a lightweight spec today. Jordan, pair with Evan on the user story. Ravi, estimate the engineering lift and suggest an A/B plan. We'll look at it tomorrow morning and decide whether to pull a 2-day spike. Jordan felt the click of a door becoming a hallway. The edges of support work had become product work in the most ordinary, undeniable way.
Reduce noise by naming a friction and proposing a small relief. The meeting ended with no theatrics, just a quiet partition of responsibility and a timeline. After the window closed, Jordan sat a moment longer at the desk, not to bask, but to memorize the feeling. A specific problem becoming a path you could walk. Work slid into a rhythm. Jordan drafted the user story like a field report. Characters, Paige, her new hire, the 4 managers. Setting, Thursday morning, fluorescent office, a spreadsheet eating time.
conflict, mislabeled column, brittle export defaults, and desired outcome. 10 minutes returned, trust restored, thinking time reclaimed. Evan added a paragraph about success metrics. Support tickets tagged export should dip by a measurable notch. Time on export flow should shorten by a visible slice, and we should see at least a handful of users save and reuse profiles within a week. Ravi replied with an estimate that looked like doable work rather than heroics. One back-end field alias, one small service to store profile metadata per user, a front-end drop-down with an obvious affordance to save/apply. Priya slotted a review for the next morning. The machine of collaboration, when aligned, sounded like a sewing machine. Small, fast, useful. In the middle of that good hum, Alicia messaged Jordan about the help center. "That style guide is real work," she wrote. "Shirley says she's never had a cleaner set of examples to enforce with. Can you present a 15-minute overview at Friday's org sync? It will keep us from drifting back into mush." Jordan agreed, and then immediately felt the old stage fright ghost peer around a corner. Presenting wasn't the fear, wasting people's time was. The fix for that fear was the same as always. Write it so plain that even people who wanted to be elsewhere would take one paragraph with them involuntarily. At lunch, Jordan stood by the window with an apple and a stray feeling. It arrived like weather. Pride, yes, but braided with a small, surprising grief. The grief was for time spent living by accident. A long stretch where tomorrow did all the heavy lifting in the calendar. Jordan didn't indulge the feeling beyond recognizing it. Grief named becomes inventory. Inventory becomes design. The afternoon still needed doing. Shirley pinged with markup on 3 help articles Jordan had refactored. The edits were sharp and fair. Where Jordan had written often, Shirley wrote when, because certainty makes support easier to follow. Where Jordan had left a single long sentence, Shirley cut it in 2. Short sentences are accessible, her comment read. People breathe between steps. Jordan smiled and accepted the changes, grateful for colleagues who traded in clarity. Mid-afternoon, a message popped in from Lydia at the community center. Quick reminder, orientation tomorrow at 6 p.m. Please bring ID and a willingness to be bored for 10 minutes, and then useful for the rest. The line made Jordan alone at the desk laugh. Jordan wrote a brief note to Maya. PM meeting went well. Small pilot may happen. I'm trying not to make it bigger than it is. But it feels like the floor under a new room. Maya replied, I'll bring houseplants for the room when it exists. Keep building.
Late afternoon softened into that hour where screens glowed a little too brightly. Jordan closed the laptop 10 minutes earlier than the calendar allowed and took the walk's cousin, stairs. Up and down the building's concrete flights, a modest ceremony that swapped fresh air for circulation. Back in the apartment, Jordan set water to boil and assembled a simple dinner: pasta, garlic, a handful of spinach thrown in at the end, a dusting of something hard and grated. The steam fogged the window for a moment and then cleared as if the glass had decided to participate in the evening. The novel waited with the patience of an old friend. Jordan opened the document and scrolled to last night's breadcrumb. Roy's switch panel, the insistence that order matters. Tonight, Elena asked why. Roy explained that the first switch woke the generator, the second told the wheel who it was, and the third invited the lights to remember their arrangement. If you invited them out of order, the lights would still come, but they'd arrive like guests with grudges, talking over each other,
forgetting who was supposed to sit where. Elena laughed at the image, and then didn't, because it felt too true. The timer went. The words counted to 200 and then a handful more. Jordan stopped, not triumphant, just done. After dishes, Jordan reviewed notes for tomorrow's PM review and then opened the ledger for a 3-minute check. Nothing to change, just a glance to remind the brain that numbers are measurements, not verdicts. The emergency fund ticked up by $25, a small stair-step no one else would notice, and Jordan would remember. As the room cooled toward night, the phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Moose graduated to 2 socks. Jordan replied with a photo of the project change page for the day, a small square of handwriting that, to an outsider, would look unremarkable. Caleb responded with a thumbs up and the words, "You look like you. It suits you." Before bed, Jordan rehearsed Friday's short talk out loud, once through to the quiet apartment. "Speak as if you're helping a smart, tired friend," Jordan said to the imaginary room. "Put the path at the top. Show before you tell. Name buttons as they are. Short sentences let people breathe." It sounded plain. That was the point. Lights out. The building sighed an old building sigh. Somewhere, a street light flickered once and then committed to steady. Jordan lay on her back and watched the ceiling take the shape of night and thought about edges becoming paths. How listening turns into language, which turns into a story, which turns into a small pilot, which turns into a different Thursday for someone like Paige, which turns into a better day for her new hire. Systems were how you scaled kindness. The thought surprised Jordan with its accuracy, and stayed. Thursday began with a clean edge. Jordan woke before the alarm and lay still for a breath, tracing the small map of the day: morning walk, PM review, possible spike on the export flow, help center edits with Shirley, orientation at the community center at 6, words after dinner. The apartment had the faint chill of a room that trusts the radiator will catch up. Outside, the lake wore a gray that wasn't sad so much as purposeful. The walk held its 10 minutes without fanfare. A runner in a neon cap arrowed past, the bakery exhaled heat and cinnamon, and a bus sighed into a stop with the weary grace of a regular. Back at the desk, Jordan brewed coffee and skimmed yesterday's one-pager one more time, trimming a phrase that hedged.
The calendar nudged. PM review at 9. Evan messaged a simple, "See you there." Jordan replied with a simple, "Ready." On the call, faces arranged themselves. Priya, crisp and focused. Ravi, with his camera off and his voice ready. Evan, the steady warmth. And Shirley, listening because the help content would have to keep up if the product moved. Priya opened with purpose. 2 things, she said. First, the saved export profiles. Second, the column label. I want to make a decision on each in 15 minutes. Jordan led with Paige's Thursday again, not as theater, but as a reminder of why they'd gathered. Then they answered Priya's question from yesterday with specifics. Saved profiles? Store per-user column selection and order in a lightweight service. Offer a clear Save Profile and Apply Profile control. Keep defaults for everyone else. Column label? Introduce an alias that maps old name to new. Ensure metrics aren't balkanized. Audit any flows that read the label as logic rather than display. Ravi laid out the lift. A day to wire up the service, a day to build the UI affordance and flagging, a half day to create the alias and guard the risky corners. Priya made the decision quickly and cleanly. Do it. 2-day spike. Target a small cohort, including Paige's account. We'll look at support volume, usage, and any surprising breakage. If it's quiet and helpful, we widen. A small green light flipped in Jordan's chest. Not a victory lap. A go signal.
Evan smiled and said they'd handle the user comms. Shirley asked for a heads-up on copy so the help center wouldn't contradict the interface. And Jordan promised to write a small, plain note that said only what was true: how to save a profile, how to apply it, and what fallback remained if something went sideways. The meeting ended on time, everyone leaving with work that fit in their hands. The next hours moved like useful gears. Jordan paired with Ravi on the user story while he sketched the data model, made a list of labels that needed checking, and jotted the plain language help article that would go live only for flagged accounts. Evan drafted the in-app microcopy, save as profile ... apply profile ... and asked Jordan for a second pair of eyes. The words were visible without shouting. They named buttons exactly as they were. Jordan adjusted one line so it sounded less like a suggestion and more like a path. Before lunch, Jordan sent Paige a short message. "We're testing saved export profiles with a small group, including your account. You'll be able to save your preferred columns and order and reuse them each week. If anything breaks, or if it saves you minutes, tell me. I'm listening." Paige replied quickly with a sentence Jordan could almost hear spoken. "If this works, you will be in my will." Jordan laughed alone and typed back, "I'll settle for 10 minutes and fewer browser swaps." Shirley and Jordan spent an hour in the help center, transforming 3 more articles that touched the export flow. They used the style guide like a ruler, cutting sentences to the length that helps rather than impresses. Where the old article meandered, the new one stacked steps like firm blocks. At the top, one small box explained profiles. At the bottom, a line offered the fallback. If something doesn't work, here's the path to support, and here's what to include so we can help fast. Jordan felt the quiet satisfaction of surfaces cleaned and labeled, a workspace made ready for a better Thursday.
Afternoon wore the rhythm of a team making something small and real. Ravi pushed a first build to a staging environment. Evan clicked through and found a stutter in the dropdown. Jordan verified the profile saved and reapplied correctly across a session. The trio pinged back and forth, not frenetic, not sluggish, just a clean exchange of problems and fixes. At 3:40, Priya gave the nod to push to the flagged cohort. Jordan added Paige's account ID to the list. A small fear and a small thrill arrived together and were both allowed to sit. At 4:10, Paige sent a screenshot. The Apply Profile dropdown sat exactly where her hand expected it to be after 1 minute of looking. "I named one Thursday Sanity," she wrote. "It works." Then, 2 minutes later, "And the label reads what it actually is. My new hire is already less confused. If this holds, you're buying me a coffee I'll pretend you made." Jordan grinned at the screen and forwarded the note to the team with a single line: "First signal positive." Ravi replied with a check mark. Priya wrote, "Let's watch for regressions before we pat ourselves too hard, but good." Late afternoon slid into the transition hour. Jordan closed the laptop with clean edges to the workday and turned to the evening's appointment, orientation at the community center. A quick change into a warm sweater, the ID tucked into a pocket, the tram to Lakeview, and the familiar brick building coming into view like a place that remembers your footsteps even if it makes you earn the welcome again. Inside, the hallway smelled like pencil shavings and floor wax, and a corkboard displayed flyers made by hands that worked quickly. Lydia met the small group of volunteers by the front desk with a smile that had done this before. "Welcome. Tonight's the boring part, which we'll make as short as we can. Then we'll show you the rooms where the boring matters."
They sat in a multi-purpose room with chairs that stacked on a rack like obedient soldiers. Livia ran through the necessary: background checks, sign-in procedures, where to find supplies, what to do in a fire drill, what to do when a kid cries because fractions are shaped like unfairness. Two other volunteers introduced themselves: Darren, an EMT who could only do Thursdays because the rest of his life belonged to shifts, and Keisha, a grad student in social work who had a laugh that made every sentence seem like good news. After the forms and the tour, Lydia led them to the homework room. The fluorescents hummed. A whiteboard listed subjects in different markers: reading, math, science. In the corner sat a photocopier like a retired athlete, still useful if you treated it with respect. Kids filtered in with the wary, hopeful look of people who have learned that help sometimes comes disguised as scolding and sometimes comes disguised as quiet. Lydia paired Jordan with a boy named Marcus, 11, whose hoodie sleeves had been chewed into a fringe and whose eyes wore a particular defensive humor. The worksheet in front of him was a battleground of fractions. "I'm bad at these," he declared like a preemptive strike. Jordan sat, not across, but beside. "Good. I'm bad at rushing. We'll trade. You go slow, I'll be patient." Marcus side-eyed them, then tried the corner of a smile and abandoned it. They started small. "What do you notice about this problem before you touch your pencil?" Marcus noticed the numbers didn't match and the lines were confusing.
Jordan drew a rectangle and divided it, not because rectangles make fractions true, but because rectangles give the brain somewhere to stand. Marcus shaded. He guessed. He was wrong. He guessed again. He was right. Jordan named the guesses as experiments. Marcus's shoulders dropped one notch. They moved to the next problem, and the next. Halfway through, Marcus looked up and said, almost bored, "It's just the order." Jordan blinked at the sentence, the way language sometimes spills into a new room. Order matters. Not because the machine cares, but because everything else that touches the machine does. Jordan smiled. "That's the whole thing, Marcus. You just learned the whole thing." The hour opened and closed like a good book chapter. No twist, just movement. When Marcus packed up, he didn't grin a movie grin, but he said, "You're coming back?" Jordan said yes in the kind of voice that means it. Lydia squeezed Jordan's shoulder on the way out. "Useful for the rest," she said softly, like a benediction. In the hall, Keisha was coaxing a surly printer into generosity, while Darren showed a girl how to cut cardboard straight by using the ruler as a fence. The building held the sound of small, right things happening. Back home, the apartment received Jordan with the particular peace that follows rooms where people need you. Dinner was simple and fast without guilt. The walk had been done, the ship had been shipped, the volunteer hour had been honest. That left the words. The couch tried its usual arguments and lost. Jordan opened the novel and found last night's breadcrumb waiting. Elena watched as Roy flipped the first switch and the generator thrummed awake, a low animal sound. The second switch sent a vibration up the steel, like a throat clearing. The third switch, when it came, didn't produce an instant blaze, but a hesitant series of flickers, bulbs negotiating with one another, as if deciding whether to bother. Roy watched with a patience that didn't perform itself. "They remember," he said, "but remembering is not the same as agreeing." One by one, the lights held. A thin cheer went up from a couple across the street who would stop to watch, without admitting they were watching. Elena didn't cheer. She felt instead a small, precise click in her chest, as if a gear had found its neighbor. The wheel didn't move, not yet, but light is a kind of motion. The timer chimed. Jordan stopped. A final pass through the day's ledger closed the loop. Daily non-negotiables: walked, shipped, wrote. Weekly moves: community center orientation, complete. Monthly leaps: saved profiles pilot, live. First kid helped with fractions, without anyone needing to pretend math is a personality trait. Jordan added a line to project change that wasn't a goal so much as a sentence worth keeping. Small green lights mean go. Not we've arrived. Just go. Before the lamp clicked off, Paige sent one more note. For the record, I didn't switch browsers once. 10 minutes back. Maybe more. Jordan read it twice and let the clean math of that find its place. Thinking time returned is a ledger worth balancing. Night gathered. Somewhere, a neighbor set down a heavy pot on the stove, the sound a soft punctuation. Jordan lay in the dark and pictured the Help Center article with its short sentences. Pages dropped down with its new memory, Marcus shading a rectangle until it made sense. Roy and his switches. Elena's coin, warm in her palm. Edges had become paths, not because of slogans, but because of verbs.
Friday's light came in clean, as if the city had been wiped down overnight. Jordan's walk felt less like a task and more like a tune-up. 10 minutes along sidewalks that creaked under the cold, past a man balancing a box of donuts like a fragile crown, past a dog that insisted on introducing itself to every lamppost with civic thoroughness. Back home, coffee steamed in the mug, and the day's outline sharpened. Final checks on the export pilot, the org sync presentation on the Help Center style guide, a quick touchpoint with Evan and Priya. 200 words after dinner. Nothing fancy, just the next right thing. Slack was awake. Ravi posted early metrics from the pilot cohort. A small table of numbers told a modest story. Across flagged accounts, time spent in the export flow was down by an average of 6 minutes. Support pings mentioning the mislabeled column had dipped to nearly zero. A handful of power users, Paige among them, had already saved multiple profiles and reapplied them. It wasn't fireworks. It was fuel. Priya responded with a measured thumbs up and the note that mattered. Let's keep it quiet and reliable, then decide Monday whether to widen. If we do, we'll need clear messaging and a rollback plan. Nice start. Jordan felt the small lift of evidence landing where it should, then turned to the slides for the org sync. Calling them slides felt grand. They were, by design, short pages of plain text and before and after examples. The title was a sentence dressed as a headline: Write help so a smart, tired person can succeed. The rest of it followed its own advice: short, declarative rules with a single example for each. Speak like a person, put the success path at the top, show before you tell, name buttons exactly as they appear, use short sentences, people breathe between steps, include a clear fallback path. Jordan rehearsed it once aloud to the quiet apartment, checking for any phrase that tried to audition for clever. When one showed up, Jordan cut it. At 10, the org sync gathered in a conference room and a grid of screens. Alicia opened with housekeeping, then handed the floor to Jordan with a glance that said, "Take your time without using more time than belongs to you." Jordan stood at the end of a long table in a room that smelled faintly of dry erase markers. A portion of their brain observed with clinical detachment, heart elevated but not racing, hands steady enough, voice arriving in full sentences without jumping the track. They began with a confession dressed as context. We've let our help center drift.
different voices, different structures, screenshots that don't match the app, and a habit of decorating where we should guide. We ask a lot of our users, sometimes more than we know. So this is a short set of rules we can enforce and examples that show why they matter. The first slide was an old article beside its new counterpart. The old one took a scenic route, offering a paragraph about how great exports were. The new one started with 3 steps a person could follow without a second coffee. Jordan read the old first, then the new, then pointed to the faces in the room. You feel the difference in your body, they said, not as theater, but as report. A few heads nodded the way people nod when they don't want to admit relief. Shirley chimed in with a line that made the room lean closer. Short sentences aren't primitive, they're generous. They respect the oxygen available to a person in trouble. Laughter rippled.
Jordan took the room through 3 more examples: naming buttons, showing before telling, adding a clean fallback box at the end so the overwhelmed knew where help lived. Each time the rhythm was the same: old, new, and the reason that survived contact with reality. Jordan closed with a least dramatic ask. We'll keep this style guide short and living. If you're writing help, use it. If you spot drift, flag it. If something you need isn't in here, tell us, and we'll add it. The point isn't perfection. It's consistency you can hold. The last slide vanished, and the room exhaled the way rooms exhale when a promise has been made and kept at the same time. Alicia spoke first. "This is the right kind of boring," she said, with the affection of someone who likes solid floors. A senior engineer at the far end of the table, a man who wore 3 pens in his shirt pocket like a philosophy, raised a hand. "I didn't know we could say, 'Name buttons exactly as they appear' out loud," he said. "Thank you." The laughter was warmer this time. A product manager from another team asked for the guide link. Someone else asked if the same principles should apply to release notes. Shirley smiled at Jordan, which was as good as a standing ovation from a writer who measures praise in millimeters. After the meeting, Alicia intercepted Jordan at the door with a quick, quiet sentence. "That's leadership without the sticker," she said. Then moved on, leaving the words behind like a coin on a windowsill. Back at the desk, Jordan messaged Evan with a brief recap and a link to the guide. He responded with a simple sentence that landed without ornament. "You did the work, then told the story. Keep doing exactly that." Lunch was quick and unremarkable. Leftover pasta brought back to life in a pan, a sliced apple, water. Unremarkable was welcome. The body didn't need celebration. It needed fuel. Jordan stood at the window and let the week spool through in small scenes. Paige saving a profile called Thursday Sanity. Marcus finding an order inside fractions. The help center shedding its extra words. The novel's Ferris wheel remembering its lights in their proper sequence. None of it would look like fireworks from a distance. Up close, it looked like a life deciding on itself. The afternoon asked for the ordinary. Polish on the help articles that touched the pilot feature, a few check-ins with support reps to make sure the front line knew what had changed for a narrow sliver of users, and a calendar hold for Monday's decision on whether to widen the cohort. Jordan wrote a short internal note with the kind of clarity that anticipates questions before they arrive. What is it? Saved export profiles per user and a corrected column label. Who has it? A small flagged set. What should you tell someone who asks? The steps, no flourish. How do we roll back if needed? A toggle. Where do you send feedback? A single channel, not your personal DMs. The note made its rounds. The pings that followed were the right size. Clarification requests, not confusion. Mid-afternoon, the phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How'd the talk go? Jordan replied with the sentence Alicia had given them. Leadership without the sticker. Maya wrote back, that's the brand. Also, coffee Sunday? Jordan said yes, and felt the quiet ease of friendships that hold you to the path without asking you to perform it. At 4, a small meeting with Priya and Ravi yielded the plan for Monday. If the pilot stayed boring through the weekend, they would widen to 30% of accounts and update the help center publicly.
Priya asked Jordan to own the release note, which was less a note and more a handful of sentences that told the truth and gave everyone a way to succeed. Jordan agreed and felt the small, satisfying weight of responsibility that fits your hand. The train home carried the usual cross-section of the city. Tired nurses, teenagers fluent in sarcasm, a man asleep with a paperback splayed across his chest like a pet. Jordan didn't read. They watched the buildings and let their nervous system register the week. Places where the system held, a day when it slipped and still held, work that bent toward usefulness, the first steps into rooms that used to feel closed. The map had begun to ink itself. Evening brought the quiet work that had become the third beat in the day's rhythm. Jordan set a timer and returned to the carnival. Tonight, the wheel had its lights. The problem was motion. Roy explained the brake, a piece of machinery the town had installed after a scare years ago, a precaution that had grown so comfortable it refused to let go. He showed Elena the mechanism, the way rust paints over intention. Together, they loosened bolts with care, naming each step aloud so the process could be repeated and improved. When the brake finally released with a sigh like a stubborn door relenting, the wheel shifted an inch. Elena felt it in her bones. Motion announced itself not with a flourish, but with a weight redistributed. The timer chimed. The words had come like a hand crank, steady, unglamorous, effective. Dinner was an omelet because there were eggs and time was finite. After dishes, the ledger got its check marks and a sentence. Daily non-negotiables. Walked, shipped, wrote. Weekly moves. Style guide presented. Pilot monitored. Sunday coffee with Maya planned. Monthly leaps. Interview summary shipped. Volunteer orientation complete. System tested under pressure. Jordan added a quiet line that felt earned more than written. Boring is the scaffold. The view is the surprise you get for climbing. The night settled with its usual sounds, pipes clicking awake and then asleep, a neighbor's laughter muffled through drywall, the elevator making itself known with a hum that suggested purpose even when it was parked. Jordan lay still and let a thought finish itself. Change hadn't felt like a thunderclap yet. It had felt like a series of small green lights and the decision to go on each one. The week was not a montage. It was a ledger of kept promises and modest improvements, some visible, some internal. It would end tomorrow and begin again, the way good systems do. Saturday announced itself with the sound of radiators knocking and a delivery truck downshifting on the street. Jordan awoke without an alarm and lay still, letting the room come into focus. The soft, familiar clutter of the apartment, a rectangle of pale light on the ceiling. The slow hum that means the city is awake
but not demanding. A weekend is a different animal. No immediate obligations, which can be both freedom and trap. Jordan decided quietly that it would be the first thing, not the second. The walk wore a weekend's pace. The sidewalks were salted and mostly dry. A father pushed a stroller with a blanket tucked under a baby's chin, and two teenagers argued amiably about whether brunch counts as a meal or a brand.
The bakery line was out the door, a coil of people rehearsing patience. Jordan kept going, 10 minutes becoming 12. Back home, coffee in hand, Jordan cracked a window to let in a ribbon of cold and sat at the table with the Project Change notebook, open to a page titled Saturday. The page had 4 modest items: laundry, weekly tidy, a call to mom, overdue and not dramatic, and a draft of release notes for Monday's maybe-widened pilot, written now while time was generous rather than Monday when time would likely be rude. At the bottom, a line not technically a task: read a chapter of a book in silence, no phone within reach. Margin, as practice, not accident. Laundry sorted itself into a rhythm. Machines thrum, the satisfying clack of quarters in the slot, the clean heft of wet cotton moved to a dryer. Jordan folded shirts into stacks that looked like decisions made. While the dryer worked, Jordan dialed Mom, who answered on the second ring with the particular delight of a person who keeps her favorites near the top of her home screen. They talked about ordinary things: weather, the neighbor's new dog, a recipe she was convinced Jordan would actually make because it only used one pan. And then, Mom, with the insight of a person who has clocked her child for years, said, "You sound not busy. What's the word? Composed." Jordan laughed softly. "Practicing boring," they said. "It's working better than ambition ever did." Mom was quiet a beat in the way that signals approval without needing to perform it. "Boring saved my life," she said, matter of fact, remembering the years after the divorce when routine was the only thing that made sure bills got paid and kids got where they were supposed to go. Boring is a kind friend. After the call, Jordan tidied with a timer: 15 minutes for the living room, 10 for the kitchen, 5 for the bathroom. A tool caddy made an appearance, and the apartment rewarded the attention by becoming a degree more breathable. The desk, already reclaimed last week, kept its promise and stayed clear. Jordan taped a new index card to the wall near the monitor. "Speak so a smart, tired person can succeed." It applied to help articles, to release notes, to the way you talk to yourself at 3:17 a.m. when the alarm labeled "Change Your Life" goes off and you have to decide whether you were serious. By late morning, the draft of the release note took shape. It read like a short note to a colleague, not a trumpet. Saved export profiles let you store your preferred columns and order, per user, and reuse them. Here's how to save. Here's how to apply. Here's what stays the same. Here's where to tell us if something breaks. A single sentence explained the column label change and why it would now match what people actually meant when they clicked it. No promises about the future, no adjectives that needed a chaperone. Jordan set the draft aside to cool. The afternoon leaned in with the gentle suggestion of exercise. Jordan stood at the closet and regarded the gym bag that had become a sculptural object. The floor rule, absolute minimum counts, applied here too. The gym 3 blocks away did not ask for heroics, it asked for showing up. Jordan laced shoes, zipped a hoodie, and went. The gym was a brightly lit democracy.
Old men walking slow on treadmills while watching the news in closed captions, college kids arguing with barbells, a woman in her 40s moving through kettlebell swings with the kind of focus that makes a person interesting.
Jordan climbed onto a rowing machine and set the monitor to an easy interval. 1 minute on, 1 minute gentle, for 15 minutes. The first pulls felt like a foreign language. The back negotiated with the hips for who was in charge. 5 minutes in, the body remembered it has a job beyond carrying the brain to meetings. Sweat, that honest reporter, arrived. Jordan didn't chase numbers, they chased form. The 15 minutes ended, and Jordan stretched on a mat in a corner that smelled like disinfectant and effort. The hamstrings filed fewer complaints than last week. A floor had been capped. The brain, that client who panics without updates, seemed soothed by the simple report. We moved. On the walk home, a light snow started, a stagehand sprinkling confetti from the catwalks. Jordan detoured through a park where a teenager practiced skateboard tricks on a patch of dry concrete, landing one clean and then pretending he hadn't just in case someone saw. Jordan clapped once, a small, rightful applause. The kid half smiled without breaking character and reset his feet. Repetition builds identity. Jordan recognized a cousin. Back in the apartment, lunch was a salad assembled with the pleasant mindlessness of chopping and a bowl of soup warmed until it emitted steam. While eating, Jordan opened the novel document and read the last 2 paragraphs out loud to hear where the breath naturally fell. The wheel's brake had loosened. The lights had agreed. The machine had sighed the way stubborn things do when treated with patience. Today, Elena would ask Roy what happens when a town has grown to like the wheel standing still. Roy would admit that motion scares people who built a life around stillness. Jordan liked the taste of that sentence and let it sit. The words came slow, then steady. Elena helped Roy trace the cable that carried commands from the panel to the motor, fingers blackening with grease that turned her into the kind of girl she had imagined when she was younger and braver in the sandbox. Roy explained torque in a voice that trusted listeners to follow without dumbing down the road. A gust picked up off the field and sent a scattering of napkins and one brave paper plate tumbling along the fence line like a parade that hadn't received its permit. They didn't flip the final lever yet. They were rehearsing, and rehearsal is a kind of reverence. 212 words registered on the counter. The timer chimed, and Jordan saved and closed, leaving a half sentence like a hand on a doorknob waiting to turn. A text arrived from Evan mid-afternoon. Pilot still boring in the best way. One bug filed about the drop-down not remembering last session on mobile. Ravi's on it. Monday still looks good. Jordan replied with a thanks and an offer to draft the public help article over the weekend so Monday didn't have to sprint at the start. Evan sent back a thumbs up spelled out in words, which somehow felt warmer. Late afternoon became the designated hour for reading. Jordan put the phone in a drawer that had nothing else to do and sat with a book, a slim, unfussy thing about attention and the dignity of the ordinary. A chapter described the way craft works when nobody is watching. A woodworker sanding the underside of a drawer that only the maker will ever touch. A cook salting the water even if no one at the table could identify why the pasta tastes better. The chapter suggested that excellence is less about moments and more about manners, how you handle the boring parts.
Jordan closed the book and leaned back, letting the idea join the others on the wall. Systems are manners you keep with yourself. Evening asked politely for dinner. Jordan obeyed and made something that would stretch to tomorrow. Roasted vegetables, brown rice, and a pan sauce improvised from what lived in the door of the fridge. As the vegetables caramelized, the apartment filled with the smell of effort paying off in sugars. Jordan set the table for one with a care previously reserved for guests. Ceremony teaches the nervous system what belongs. Tonight, belonging did not require witnesses. After dishes, Caleb called, breathless, to report that Moose had indeed eaten a second sock and then, as dogs sometimes do, acted affronted by the consequences. The brothers talked about nothing and then something. Caleb admitted he'd been skipping the last 10 minutes of his runs because cold air makes excuses persuasive. Jordan confessed they'd lost a morning to snooze and then recovered with the triangle: fallback, floor, friend. They made a pact, sibling to sibling, modest and enforceable. Jordan would text a photo of the Project Change page each night for a week. Caleb would send a screenshot of his running app with the full distance, no rounding down. Gentle surveillance, chosen on purpose. The night's last work was a pass at the public help article for saved profiles, written as if talking to Paige's new hire on her first Thursday. Step 1. Open exports. Step 2. Select the columns and order you actually use. Step 3. Click Save Profile and give it a name that means something to you. Step 4. Next week, click Apply Profile and move on with your life. At the bottom, the fallback box. If something breaks or doesn't look right, here's how to tell us quickly. Include these two details so we don't waste your time. Jordan read it out loud. It didn't sing. It guided. That was the job. Before bed, the ledger got its modest check marks. Daily non-negotiables. Walked, shipped, release notes draft, help article draft, wrote. Weekly moves. Laundry, tidy, called mom, gym floor kept. Monthly leaps. Pilot support ready. Identity practicing verbs outside the workday. Jordan added one more line that looked like a riddle and felt like a receipt. Weight doesn't disappear, it moves. From dread into doing. The apartment settled around the quiet. Snow thickened outside, giving the streetlights halos. Somewhere a neighbor played a piano softly, making a handful of notes into a room. Jordan lay on their back and thought about the difference between momentum and pressure. Momentum is weight that moves. Pressure is weight that sits on your chest. This week, the balance had shifted, not by accident, but by 100 small choices that accrued like interest paid into the right account. The lamp clicked off. The city breathed. Tomorrow would bring coffee with Maya and, with any luck, more of the right kind of boring. Jordan closed their eyes with the particular confidence of a person who knows what the morning asks and intends to answer it in verbs. Sunday rose slowly, a quieter light pooling on the floor like a soft decision. Jordan gave the morning its 10 minutes outside. Footsteps crisp in thin snow, the bakery's door propped open to cool trays, a jogger counting breaths in a rhythm that made the sidewalk feel like a metronome. Back home, coffee steamed, and the apartment carried the easy hush of a week exhaling. The calendar held one anchor: noon with Maya. Everything else could stretch or tighten around that.
High Noon Cafe was half full, the kind of winter crowd that knows which tables avoid the draft from the door. The chalkboard menu wore new loops, and the neon sign hummed its ongoing thesis, "Make it count." Maya waved from a corner, a book face down beside her mug, the posture of someone who uses attention like currency and doesn't spend it lightly. Her coat hung on the back of the chair, scarf draped like punctuation. "You look settled," she said when Jordan sat, "like your nervous system's stopped tap dancing." "I bribed it with routine," Jordan said. "Turns out it's a cheap date." They ordered without ceremony, latte for Maya,
black coffee for Jordan, and let talk find its gate. Jordan recapped the week in plain pieces. The interview with Paige, the small pilot with saved export profiles, the Help Center style guide, Lydia's orientation at the community center, fractions with Marcus, the novel's slow turning of gears. Nothing asked for applause. Maya listened the way she always did, nods small, questions precise. "What surprised you?" she asked. "That I didn't need a dramatic win to feel momentum. A quiet pilot, clean sentences, 200 words, a kid understanding that order matters. It all felt like motion without noise." Maya folded her hands around her mug. "Noise is expensive," she said. "Costs you attention on the back end." "What did the week cost you?" Jordan thought. "Less sleep one night, a morning I lost to the snooze button and had to buy back with the triangle, fallback, floor, friend, a little grief over time I spent living by accident." They paused. "But the ledger balanced. Weight moved from dread into doing." Maya smiled with that quiet pride she wore sparingly, like good jewelry. "So what's the long view? Not the to-do list. The direction." Jordan turned the question over. Direction. "Give people thinking time back in any room I'm in. At work, clean flows and help content that doesn't steal oxygen. At the community center, patience with kids while the math stops feeling like a bully. In my life, systems that make anxiety redundant. And finish the novel like a promise kept to a younger version of me who deserved an adult that finished things." Maya leaned back, pleased. "That's a compass, not a map. Good. Maps change. Compasses make maps less scary." She sipped her latte. "What does the compass say about money?" "Sunday ledger. Numbers are not moral. They are measurements. I cut 2 subscriptions, set a floor for savings, and scheduled a weekly 20-minute check. Boring seems to be where the air is." "Boring is sanctuary," Maya said, the phrase they'd shared repeating not as cliché but as a reminder. "Let me add one thing. You're adding responsibilities. Product work in the edges of your role, volunteering, the novel. Protect margin like it's non-negotiable. Not as self-care branding, but as system integrity. Burnout is a system failure masquerading as virtue." Jordan nodded and made a note on the card they carried in a pocket now. "Margin is part of the work." The cafe's soundtrack shifted to something warm and unobtrusive. Outside, a bus sighed. A child in a puffy jacket pressed his palms to the window and fogged a circle like a moon. "Tell me about the novel," Maya said. "I like it when you talk about things that don't owe anyone ROI." "It's a Ferris wheel that forgot how to move," Jordan said. "A kid named Elena who counts time by coins, a maintenance guy who knows order matters but refuses to be mystical about it. The town grew to like the wheel as a landmark, not a machine. They're trying to remember how to be okay with motion." Maya's mouth tipped into a half smile. "Familiar," she said. "You writing yourself again?" "I'm writing a machine that acts like a nervous system," Jordan said, surprised by the sentence and pleased with it. "Or maybe I'm writing a nervous system that needs a maintenance manual." They walked after coffee, coats zipped against a wind that had sharpened its argument. Street sides held small domestic scenes, the prelude to a family lunch, someone coaxing a reluctant dog, a string of Christmas lights that hadn't admitted January yet. They paused at a crosswalk and watched the signal cycle even though no cars moved. Order mattered here too, not because the machine cared, but because everything else that touched the machine did. Back home, Sunday did its small anchoring work. The ledger got its 20 minutes, bills checked, envelopes adjusted, a quick reconciliation that replaced dread with data. The emergency fund ticked up another small square.
Jordan labeled a cash envelope "Coffee with a Friend," not because coffee needed budgeting, but because friendship did. Time, attention, and yes, money set aside on purpose. A reply arrived from Lydia with a schedule. Thursday you'll have reading table from 6:30 to 7:15. Be willing to read the same paragraph 3 times and celebrate a fourth. Also, our copier will betray you. It respects calm threats. Jordan laughed and put the slot in the calendar with the reverence of a standing appointment. Useful for the rest. In the afternoon quiet, Jordan drafted the public help article that would go live if the pilot widened Monday. The language stayed ordinary. Save the columns you actually use. Name the profile so future you knows what you meant. Apply it next week and go do your real job. At the bottom, the fallback box. If export looks wrong, check the label. If it still misbehaves, here's exactly what to send us so we can fix it quickly. Jordan read it aloud once to make sure the sentences carried their own weight without huffing. They did. The novel asked for its daily ration. The words arrived in the halting way of a machine warming to its task. Elena and Roy traced wires with cold fingers. Elena asked if machines remember shame. Roy said machines don't remember anything. People do, and then they blame the machine because it's safer than admitting they're the ones who froze. A gust lifted a corner of tarp and snapped it like a flag. They didn't turn the wheel yet. Rehearsal first, practice as reverence. 204 words, saved and stopped on purpose. Late afternoon bowed to evening. Caleb's text arrived with a photo of Moose asleep in a pile of laundry like a saint in the wrong painting. Ran the full distance, he wrote. No rounding down. Sent me my screenshot. Jordan replied with a photo of the project.
Reduce noise. Change page. And the smallest, most satisfying set of check marks. Gentle surveillance. Chosen on purpose. Working as designed. Dinner was leftovers turned into something else. Jordan sautéed the roasted vegetables with an egg and a spoon of rice, the pan singing an ordinary praise song to heat. They ate at the table, without a screen, a book propped open to the chapter about the dignity of small crafts. A line caught and held. Excellence is the accumulation of manners kept in private. Jordan let the sentence settle near the others. Before bed, the week received its ledger. Daily non-negotiables. Walked, shipped, public help draft, ledger, wrote. Weekly moves. Coffee with Maya, Sunday money check, book chapter in quiet. Monthly leaps. Pilot support ready for widen, compass, named out loud. Jordan added one last line so the brain would have a true sentence to take into sleep. The long view is not a destination, it's the way you aim while you take the next small step. The lamp clicked off. Snow fell again, more confetti from the catwalk. Somewhere, someone upstairs vacuumed at an hour that suggested a party had been survived. The radiator knocked once, and then calmed. Jordan lay still, feeling the benign weight of a week that held, the clean ask of a Monday ready to be answered by verbs, and the gentle insistence of a life changing the way a machine starts, by sequence, by patience, by a hand on the right switch in the right order. Monday arrived with a sky the color of paper before ink. Jordan woke to the alarm and sat up without negotiation, feet on the floor, the day assembling itself with the practiced clicks of a camera loading film. 10 minutes outside reset the horizon line. Sidewalks salted to a dull sparkle, a bus exhaling, the bakery already busy with people whose mornings were measured in trays and timers. Back in the kitchen, the coffee's steam curled in a way that looked like a lesson. Rise, condense, return. Jordan opened the notebook, wrote the 3 non-negotiables in their small, firm hand, and let the system start the day before the mood could vote. Slack wore Monday's uniform, unread dots, a few threads already hot. Calendar blocks stacked like bricks. At 8:30, Priya posted pilot metrics with the kind of economy that makes information feel like leadership. Saved profiles used by 41% of flagged users at least once, 30% twice. Export flow time down by 5 to 8 minutes across accounts. No spikes in support volume. One mobile persistence bug fixed. Then the sentence that matters in offices where decisions are made as verbs. Widen to 30% by noon. Monitor. Regroup at 4. A thin thread of satisfaction ran up Jordan's spine. Not fireworks. Motion. Evan pinged. Release note and help article ready? Jordan replied with links and a simple, plain and live. Evan skimmed and came back with a single suggestion. Move the fallback box higher, just under the steps, so people see where help lives before they need it. Jordan agreed, made the change, and watched the page become truer to its purpose. Shirley pushed the Public Help Center update and posted a screenshot that matched the app, the text, and the reality. The triangle of clarity locked into place. Interface, documentation, outcome. At 9, the widening began. Ravi flipped the toggle for the first batch, while Jordan watched metrics populate on the dashboard in tidy, unshowy lines. Priya's face in the stand-up was the look of a person counting real things. If this stays quiet by 2, we'll widen again. If it's noisy, we will be boring and fix it before we go further. No heroes.
The phrase borrowed Jordan's breath for a second. No heroes was the right kind of ceiling. It forced craft. Between pushes, Jordan worked the edges that tie a product change into a life. A short internal note for support named exactly what had changed and gave 2 crisp examples of when to suggest profiles and when not to. A message to Paige said, "Widening today. If you notice anything unexpected, I'll be watching too." Paige replied with a photo of a coffee cup and the caption, "My will remains in discussion." It made Jordan laugh in the quiet way that doesn't spill focus. By noon, the dashboard told a story a person could respect. Saved profiles appeared in logs the way new habits appear in a calendar, spaced, then regular. Export times ticked down another half-minute. A handful of users saved profiles called things like Thursday Sanity, Ops Weekly, and one lovely outlier, For Janine, a name that made Jordan picture someone somewhere saving future Janine 10 minutes of Thursday. Support stayed boring. Priya widened to the full 30% and scheduled the 4 o'clock check. After a quick lunch, leftover stir-fry turned into something new with an egg tossed in and the heat turned high. Jordan returned to the Help Center refresh. Shirley had left notes on 2 articles. Remove the introductory paragraph that apologized for the product, sharpen a step that started with a verb, standardize screenshots so text and interface carried one name. Jordan worked the markup line by line. In one article, a sentence read, "You may want to consider clicking the button labeled Continue to proceed." Jordan rewrote it to click Continue. The oxygen returned to the sentence, and with it, a reader's attention. Small rescues, multiplied, looked like a different landscape. Mid-afternoon, Alicia stopped by Jordan's desk with a quiet smile and a question that sounded like a test that was really an invitation.
How much of this did you plan, and how much did you design as you went? Jordan answered plainly. The compass had been named, give people back thinking time, and then the map was redrawn daily, one friction at a time. Alicia nodded once. Good. Be ready to show your 3 portfolio stories at next week's team meeting. It helps people see the through line. The words portfolio stories rolled in Jordan's head with a double gravity. The work was becoming narrative, and narrative was how rooms agreed on reality. At 4, the checkpoint held. Priya summarized. Quiet enough to widen to 50% tomorrow if the night didn't surprise them. A single bug logged and fixed. A handful of praise notes. No drama. She assigned next steps without ceremony. Ravi to finish the persistence edge case. Evan to shape a small feedback prompt that didn't turn the interface into a survey stand. And Jordan to watch support threads for drift and refine the help article if new patterns appeared. The call ended with the particular relief of decisions made in the open. Jordan closed the work laptop at 5:30 and stood in the window's square of light. The city showed its late afternoon faces, people walking fast against the cold, a cyclist wrapped in 2 scarves, a child in a red hat stomping at snow piles with the seriousness of an appointed inspector. Tonight would have its same rhythm: dinner, words, a check-in with the ledger. The phone buzzed with a text from Caleb. Run logged, no rounding down. Moose pictured in a contrite pose beside a mangled sock, like a culprit attending his own press conference.
Jordan sent back the day's page, the small grid of check marks, and felt the minute tug of accountability turning into a string that guided rather than tethered. The novel made its claim on the evening. Jordan reread yesterday's paragraph to find the seam where the next thread would pull. Roy and Elena had loosened the brake. They had agreed to rehearsal before performance. Tonight they would test the motor. Roy coached Elena through the sequence as if teaching a dance to someone who could learn steps but not the music yet. First the generator, then the relay, then the brief pause where you listen for trouble the way a parent listens for a child going quiet in the other room. Elena felt the pause vibrate in her teeth. The motor grumbled, coughed, then settled into a sound that was not pretty but was promising. The wheel shifted another inch, a movement the eye might have missed if not for the way the light traced the steel. Roy did not cheer. He tested a bolt with a wrench and nodded once to a god he didn't claim to believe in. 221 words appeared, the timer chimed, and Jordan stopped on purpose with a sentence mid-stride, a door left ajar. Dinner was simple and fast. Roasted vegetables from yesterday, a pan reheated until sugars crept back awake, rice to catch them, water cold and unapologetic. After dishes, Jordan opened the ledger for its Monday check and set the timer for 20 minutes. Numbers were not moral, they were measurements. Bills aligned. The small automatic transfer to savings had hopped accounts without complaint. The cash envelope labeled "Coffee with a Friend" had a few quiet dollars sitting like a promise they would keep. Jordan canceled a streaming service they had forgotten they owned and wrote the savings into the margin like a line item in an ethic. Less noise, more air. An email from Lydia arrived just before 9. Quick heads up, it read. Marcus will be back Thursday. He's bringing a science worksheet this time and a new reluctance he calls attitude. Bring your rectangle drawing pen and your patience. Jordan smiled at the screen and replied with a simple, "See you then." The Thursday slot in the calendar felt less like charity and more like infrastructure, something a week uses to hold its shape. Before bed, Jordan wrote 2 notes in Project Change. The first was a short ledger of kept promises. Daily non-negotiables met. Pilot widened without noise. Help center sharper by 3 small cuts. Novel moved by 200 words. Ledger done. The second note was a sentence meant to be read again later, a breadcrumb for future you when the room gets dark.
Motion announces itself as weight redistributed, not applause. The line felt truer than it sounded. That was enough. The apartment calmed. Pipes clicked as if agreeing to rest. Snow, thin as dust, drifted in the cone of a streetlight and made the city look briefly like a set where weather is hired by the hour. Jordan lay down and let the day run once more in a short sequence. Toggle widened, profile saved, column renamed, sentence cut, Marcus scheduled, wheel shifted. The thought that arrived last was the oldest and newest one. Identity follows verbs. Tomorrow would ask the same question. The answer would again be a sequence, not a speech. Tuesday opened with a tarnished sky and a forecast that couldn't commit. Jordan laced shoes, took the morning's 10 minutes, and watched the lake trade small waves with the wind like two tired shopkeepers. The bakery smelled like sugar deciding to be generous.
Back home, coffee steamed, and the day arranged itself into the usual sequence. Ship something real, tend the pilot, sharpen help, write 200 words, keep the margin block intact. By 9, the dashboard showed an ambiguous mood. Saved profiles were being used steadily, but export time for one subset of accounts ticked upward by a minute. The number wasn't panic-worthy. It was interesting. Priya flagged it without drama. Could be the alias logging slow in one region, Ravi wrote. I'll check the path. Jordan replied with a short note. I'll watch support for a matching pattern and comb the wording on the help article for anything that might be sending folks on the long route. At 9:40, support ping with a noisy thread. A client in the southeast reported intermittent timeouts on export since the widening. 3 messages stacked quickly, then a fourth with the tone of a person who has already had a morning and did not want another. Jordan felt the old adrenaline tap the vein and make a case for abandoning the day's structure. The triangle, fallback, floor, friend, flashed like an exit sign inside their head. Fall back to process. Keep the floor. Ask for help where help belongs. Jordan wrote a clear internal post that collected the status into one place. Symptoms, region, suspected correlation with label alias and profile persistence, and the immediate workarounds. Then a public update in precise language for the affected customers. Exports may time out. Here are 2 ways to retry without losing your work. We're tracing the slowdown and will update at the top of the hour. The tone didn't apologize for existing. It apologized for friction. Ravi posted a log trace with a likely culprit, an edge case in how the alias resolved for a small shard. Evan suggested 1 line of in-app copy to prevent a pointless loop. If export spins for more than 15 seconds, refresh once. No need to reselect your profile. By 11:30, the fix was live for the shard. Metrics leveled. The southeast thread calmed, the final message reading like relief wearing business attire. Priya summarized the incident with her usual economy. 2-hour detour, small cut. Thanks for keeping it boring. The room of Jordan's nervous system exhaled. The system had bent, then held. The rest of the morning belonged to the help center. Shirley had left a thoughtful comment on an article that Jordan had fixed yesterday. We're still orienting around our product rather than the user's job, she wrote. Lead with their goal. Send this to your team in 5 minutes without cleaning columns. Then show how. Jordan tried it. The new opening felt less like a manual and more like a hand on a shoulder pointing toward a door. They traded 2 more passes and landed on something both could defend later when the room got crowded and opinions returned wearing lanyards. Noon scraped against appetite. Jordan reheated last night's vegetables and rice until they remembered how to be food and ate standing at the counter, going over the afternoon quietly.
There was a small one-on-one with Alicia. There was the margin block, tonight's nothing, that had to remain intact because systems without margin break in pretty ways that hide the fracture until it's expensive. There were the novel's 200 words, a promise that didn't care whether the day had been polite. Alicia's one-on-one took place in a corner room where the building's brick framed a rectangle of winter. She opened with a nod toward the morning's detour.
You didn't sprint. You coordinated. Jordan accepted the observation like a receipt rather than a trophy. Alicia shifted to the longer view. You're making portfolio stories. Good. I want you to put dates on them. If you were to apply for an internal rotation with product this spring, show me 3 artifacts that prove the verbs you're claiming. Your one-pagers, the interview summary, the help style guide, this morning's incident wrap. Those count. Make them findable and readable by someone who didn't live your week. Jordan felt the sentence land on an already cleared shelf. Understood, they said. I'll assemble them like case notes, not theater. Alicia's mouth tipped. You're allergic to theater for the right reasons. Keep the allergy. Back at the desk, Jordan started a folder. Portfolio. Plain as a label on a jar. The interview summary already fit. Today's small incident would too. A tidy postmortem written in the style guide's voice, with an emphasis on the user's job and the process that kept the detour from turning into a parade. Jordan drafted the bones. What happened, what we saw, what we tried, what we learned, what we changed. No blame, no myths. The kind of story that makes teams better when the person who fixed it isn't in the room. Mid-afternoon asked for a choice. The margin block glowed on the calendar like a small park amid concrete. It would be easy to pave it with just one more task. Jordan stood, filled a glass with water, and treated the block like a meeting with someone they liked and respected. They shut the laptop and took the building's stairs, up and down for 10 minutes, then sat by the window with the phone in a drawer and read 2 pages of the book on attention. The pages argued that breaks aren't a vacation from work. They are part of the work. The brain needs to idle to let solutions congeal. Jordan felt a modest, undeniable return on the investment. The morning's knot now showed 3 loose threads. Evening narrowed around the small ritual that had become a hinge. The novel's document opened to the sentence left ajar last night. Roy and Alana stood in the cold with the motor's new sounds settling into the bones of the wheel. Alana asked what happens if the town doesn't want the wheel to move. Roy answered without poetry. Machines do what they're told. People do what they tolerate. He showed her the last lever and didn't touch it. Practice first, he said again, as if repetition could change a mind more gently than argument. Alana thought about coins and time and why a stopped landmark feels like safety. The paragraph took on a quiet momentum, like a truck finally rolling after the brake is released. 208 words. Jordan stopped mid-image, a light reflecting off a bolt as if it had remembered it was made to shine. Dinner was simple, scrambled eggs and a half avocado, a slice of toast that crackled properly when cut. Jordan ate slowly, then opened the ledger for the Tuesday glance. A few dollars in the coffee with a friend envelope, a grocery receipt entered, a note to cancel a trial before it became a bill. Numbers were not moral, they were measurements. The line soothed the part of the brain that prefers facts to worries. Caleb's text arrived like a check-in from a friendly foreman. Run done, full distance, no cheating. A photo of Moose wearing a new bandana accompanied the screenshot. Jordan sent back the Project Change page, check marks nested in their boxes like birds in their proper houses. Caleb replied, "Consistency looks good on you." Jordan typed, "It feels like a jacket that finally fits."
Before bed, Jordan wrote 2 lines in the notebook, then underlined the second. The first, daily non-negotiables kept, incident handled without theater, help article improved, 200 words written. The second, systems are trust on paper, margin is trust in practice. The apartment went dim in an agreeable way, pipes settled,
A neighbor's laugh stumbled and then got itself under control. Outside, snow flirted with becoming rain, then changed its mind. Jordan lay still and let the day replay once more. The dip in metrics, the clean fix, Alicia's invitation disguised as a challenge, the preserved margin, the novel's motor coming to life. The decision that felt most costly at noon, the refusal to pave over the margin, looked most valuable at night. Tomorrow would have opinions. Jordan would answer in verbs and leave one sentence half-finished for the morning to pull. Wednesday drew itself in clean lines. Jordan woke when the alarm did, swung feet to the floor, and answered the morning without debate. Outside, the walk stitched 10 minutes through air that bit the teeth and made breath visible. The lake wore a pale skin of ice at the edges. A delivery truck idled with the patience of a draft horse. The bakery exhaled its warm, sugared breath. Back home, coffee steamed into the quiet, and the day organized itself. Check pilot metrics, refine help, assemble portfolio case notes, 200 words, community center tomorrow, margin preserved. By 8:30, the dashboard had the even pulse everyone wanted. Saved profiles usage climbed in tidy increments. Export time continued to fall by half minutes across the widened cohort. Support remained boring in the best sense, a trickle of clarifications, no shouts. Priya posted 2 sentences that sounded like leadership wearing sneakers. Will widen to 50% at noon. If it stays quiet, full rollout Friday. Same rules. No heroes, no theatrics, only craft. Ravi replied with the deployment plan. Evan drafted the smallest possible in-app nudge to help new users discover the profile control without turning the screen into a billboard. Jordan reviewed both with the kind of attention that returns more than it costs. Between threads, Jordan opened the folder now labeled Portfolio and started turning the week's verbs into artifacts someone else could read without needing Jordan in the room. The first case note, a 1-page narrative of Page's interview, written with dates, quotes used sparingly, screenshots annotated where they earned their space, and outcomes framed as thinking time returned. The second, the saved profiles pilot, told in the sequence Priya liked: problem, smallest relief, decision points, metrics that mattered, and the discipline of staying boring. The third, the Help Center style guide and examples, old beside new, each change justified not by taste, but by a user's job to be done. Jordan kept each page plain and legible, a short story collection bound by the same thesis: give people back thinking time. At 10, the product stand-up turned into a quick design critique. The new Apply Profile drop-down worked well on desktop, but on mobile it hugged a corner too tightly, flirting with the thumb's blind spot. Evan shared a mock with a few pixels worth of mercy. Ravi estimated an hour to move the affordance and keep it friendlier to small hands. Priya nodded and cut other noise to make room for the hour. Jordan added a small line to the help article for mobile: where to find the control without hunting. The triangle of clarity held: interface, documentation, outcome.
A message from Alicia arrived just before lunch. Put a 15-minute slot on next Tuesday's staff meeting for your 3 case notes. Show only what a person can use. Leave room for their questions. Jordan accepted the calendar invite and felt the appropriate nerves. Stage fright tempered by the knowledge that the work itself could carry part of the room. The plan was the same as Friday. Speak so a smart, tired person can succeed. End before anyone wonders when you'll end. Noon brought the scheduled widening. Priya flipped the toggle for 50%, then posted the same instruction she'd used all week. Monitor. When in doubt, do less. Jordan watched the dashboard with a practiced calm, scanning for oddities, shaping a short internal note the support team could paste when questions arose. Explanations in sentences so short they bordered on kindness. When Page messaged with a single line, Half my team just realized Monday could have been like this years ago. Jordan typed back the only true thing. Better now counts. Afternoons stretched out for the quieter craft of making public words match private reality. Shirley and Jordan worked through 3 more articles, cutting decoration, and adding the one sentence readers always look for, but writers often hide. The fallback path if this fails. At one point, Jordan caught themselves writing a pretty paragraph and deleted it without ceremony. The rule held: outcomes over adjectives. Short sentences let people breathe. A text from Lydia popped up with the kind of humor that does not try too hard. Tomorrow's reading table will feature Marcus, who insists science is a conspiracy but is willing to be disproved. Bring rectangles and patience. Jordan smiled at the screen and added a sticky note to the front door so Thursday's evening could not claim surprise. Keys, wallet, courage. The words had weathered into a ritual now. The doorframe knew them. Mid-afternoon brought a small detour that might once have become drama. A client in the West reported that saved profiles did not persist across a new browser they'd installed overnight. Ravi confirmed the cause and posted a fix ETA that was honest rather than flattering. Jordan wrote a one-sentence internal brief so support would not improvise troubleshooting live. Profiles are stored per user, per browser. If a user switches browsers, they'll need to save again until the cross-browser sync ships next quarter. A principle emerged behind the fix. Tell the truth about constraints, and you prevent the birth of myths. Priya echoed it. Let's not promise ghosts. We'll build the thing when we build it. At 4, metrics remained calm. Priya tentatively plotted full rollout for Friday morning if the evening stayed level. A meeting invite appeared on calendars. Pilot retrospective. 10 minutes max. Lessons learned while the lesson is still warm. Jordan felt the week tilt toward completion. Not with fatigue, but with that good tired that comes from lifting the right weight the right way. The train home pulled the city past in framed scenes. A woman in a mustard coat read a library book with reverence. 2 teenagers performed a debate about whether a local team had a shot at the playoffs that sounded like philosophy on the move. And a man in work boots slept with his mouth open, and the relief of a shift ended. Jordan didn't write. They watched and memorized the ordinary, which had become a kind of practice as well. Evening narrowed to the novel's small, firm ask. The document opened to the sentence left ajar.
Roy showed Alina the last lever, the one that would send the wheel into a first honest turn. Not a demonstration, a commitment. He told her the trick wasn't strength, but sequence and attention, then asked whether she wanted to be the one to pull. Alina's coin lay warm in her fist. She thought about the town's love for landmarks that don't move, about how motion looks like betrayal to people who arranged their furniture around stillness. She nodded. Roy counted. 1 for breath, 2 for fear, 3 for the truth you can only learn in motion. Alina pulled. The wheel resisted like a body in a cold pool, then accepted the argument. Quarter turn, then half. A groan that turned into a kind of music. Down at street level, a handful of people paused and pretended they hadn't. 220 words. Jordan stopped with a line mid-arc, so tomorrow would have a handle. Dinner was a bowl assembled out of repetition. Rice, roasted vegetables, an egg broken into a hot pan and folded until it held its shape. Jordan ate at the table without a screen and wrote 2 lines on an index card for tomorrow's pocket. Evidence accumulates. Boring is the scaffolding. Change is the view. The card joined the others in a small private deck.
The ledger took 5 minutes tonight, exactly 5. A ritual respectful of margin. A receipt entered, an envelope topped up, a glance at the emergency fund that now resembled a small puddle on a sunny day rather than a mirage. Numbers remained measurements, not verdicts. The brain, that old client, seemed satisfied with the update. Caleb's nightly check-in arrived on schedule. Run completed. No rounding down. Moose pictured asleep with the seriousness only dogs bring to rest. Jordan sent back the project change page. Checkmarks nested. A small note. Case notes drafted. Portfolio folder looks like a real thing. Caleb replied, "Evidence, sis. Keep stacking it." The word landed correctly. Not praise. Accounting. Before bed, Jordan practiced Tuesday's presentation aloud once, the way a carpenter tests a drawer's glide. 3 stories, they said to the room. Each returns thinking time. Each shows its math. Nothing extra. The sentences traveled their own weight well enough. The lamp went off. The apartment settled into the familiar nocturne of pipes and muted laughter, and an elevator that hummed its intention even when still. Jordan lay in the dark and felt the week's shape. A pilot that stopped being an experiment and became part of the furniture. Help words that stopped performing and started guiding. A portfolio that looked less like ambition and more like a record of verbs. A Ferris wheel that consented to turn. The thought that closed the day was not a slogan, just a sentence fit to carry forward. When evidence accumulates, identity stops needing speeches. Thursday's cold put a clean edge on everything, like a pencil sharpened 1 notch past ideal. Jordan walked there 10 minutes, counted breaths, and let the lake's gray teach the morning how to be steady. Back home, coffee climbed into the room. The day arranged itself with deliberate restraint. A last check on pilot metrics, a pass over the help articles, an evening at the community center with Lydia and Marcus, 200 words for the novel, and looming just ahead, next Tuesday's staff presentation, the 3 case notes that would have to carry their own weight in a room that gave praise sparingly and attention only to what it fed it. By 9, Priya widened the pilot to 80% with the same rules that had governed the week. No heroes, no theatrics, only craft.
Reduce noise stayed calm. Quiet is the compliment we want, Evan wrote. Jordan felt the right kind of pride, the sort that doesn't leak into swagger, the kind that makes you check one more edge case out of respect for what's working. Case notes became objects you could pick up. Jordan refined the pages until each told its story in one breath. Pages Thursday and saved profiles, the help centers before and after, and the rule set that held it together. The outage that wasn't, the 2-hour detour handled by process and plain language instead of adrenaline and myth. Alicia messaged a single line, trim 2 sentences from each, because good managers know that cutting is a gift. Jordan cut, and everything read straighter. At lunch, Jordan stood at the window with an apple and noticed a feeling that had been with them all week, unnamed. Not momentum exactly, not relief, something closer to composure. The system had survived a bad morning, absorbed a detour, and held its shape. The nervous system had observed evidence accumulate and adjusted its forecasts accordingly. You cannot argue a body into calm. You can only train it with proof. Jordan wrote that inside the Project Change notebook and underlined it twice, not for drama, but for retrieval. Evening belonged to Lakeview. The community center's hallway smelled like pencils and floor wax again. The whiteboard carried new subjects written in layered inks, and Lydia moved through the room with the tempo of a person who trusts volunteers to find their level if given a clear first step. Marcus arrived with a science worksheet and a posture that said he was ready to dislike something on principle. Jordan didn't argue with the posture. They sat beside him and asked for the story of the last time science felt like mockery. 6th grade. We did lab stuff and it never worked. Jordan drew a rectangle, Marcus grinned in spite of himself, and they turned ratios into something a hand could shade. When the worksheet shifted from conspiracy to problem set, Marcus muttered, "Order matters," and rolled his eyes at the fact that he meant it. Lydia, passing by, caught the phrase and gave Jordan a quick, quiet fist to the shoulder, useful for the rest. Back home, the novel asked for its ration and received it. Elena's first pull had moved the Ferris wheel. Now came the work of letting the town see it without turning away. Roy insisted on checks between every quarter turn, heat, sound, friction, bolts, because sequence is not superstition, it's kindness to whatever comes next. Jordan stopped mid-sentence again because tomorrow deserved a handle. Before bed, Jordan rehearsed the staff meeting talk once to the room. 3 pages, each with a title that could be read in a hallway. Give people back thinking time. Short sentences. Math shown, nothing extra. The pages lay on the desk like tools set out for a job you'd started years ago and finally remembered how to finish. Friday rose clear and spare, a page with margins. Jordan walked the morning into shape. 10 minutes of air that stung just enough to remind a person they were alive. Then returned to coffee and a desk where the week's work waited without drama. The dashboard breathed evenly. Saved profiles were being used because they were useful, not because anyone cheered. Export times held their gain. Support remained the right kind of boring. At 9, Priya posted the sentence that changes a pilot's tense. Full rollout today. No heroes, no theatrics.
Reduce noise. Ravi confirmed the toggles and the guardrails. Evan cued a line of in-app copy that named exactly what a person needed and nothing more. Shirley pushed a final pass on the help article, short steps, the control easy to find on mobile, the fallback box visible before trouble could pretend to be mystery. Jordan read every word aloud once to make sure the sentences carried their own weight. The switch widened. Nothing cracked. The room of Jordan's nervous system did not wait for the other shoe. It listened, registered quiet, and let quiet be the point. Paige sent a message with a screenshot of her Apply Profile dropdown and a single line, 10 minutes back, again. Jordan replied, "Keep them," and meant the time, not the thanks. Between checks, Jordan rehearsed Tuesday's talk with the pages set out like equipment on a bench. 3 case notes, 3 small stories that returned thinking time, the saved profiles and the column that finally told the truth, the help center that stopped decorating and started guiding, the 2-hour detour that stayed a detour because process outran adrenaline. Alicia's earlier instruction, trim 2 sentences from each, made the stories cleaner. The titles read like hallway advice. Make the machine match the mind. Speak so a smart, tired person can succeed. Keep incidents small with plain updates and tight loops. Jordan timed the talk once. 11 minutes. Space left for questions. Space left for people to take what they needed and go. Noon found Jordan at the community center's copier with Lydia, coaxing the machine into generosity and laughing when it pretended offense. The Thursday slot had become a beam in the week's frame. Friday's quick stop to prep materials felt like reinforcement. Marcus's ratios were sitting beneath a magnet on Lydia's filing cabinet, a rectangle shaded into cents. Useful for the rest was not a slogan anymore. It was a habit. The afternoon turned inward to the novel. The document opened to the sentence left ajar. Elena and Roy worked the wheel through its sequence, quarter turn, half, 3/4,
each pause a check that honored what could go wrong without worshiping it. The town gathered by the fence slowly, the way people acclimate to the idea that something might move again. A girl in a red hat pointed. A man in a work jacket took off his gloves without noticing he had. When the wheel completed its first full turn, there was no civic fanfare. The sound it made was honest machinery doing the thing it had been built to do. Weight lifted, weight set down, motion distributed, motion received. Elena placed the coin in Roy's palm, and without quite understanding why, felt taller by a degree. Jordan stopped at 203 words, a clean number that meant a promise kept. The page count mattered less than the ritual. Sequence, attention, kindness to whatever comes next. Identity follows verbs. The book, like the week, moved. That evening, the ledger took its 5 minutes. Numbers remained measurements, not verdicts. The modest emergency fund ticked up again, a quiet stair-step. The envelope labeled "Coffee with a Friend" held its small budget, and with it, an implicit reminder that relationships deserve line items and time slots, not whatever is left over. A subscription that had outlived its usefulness was canceled without ceremony. Margin protected felt like a decision that made all the other decisions possible. Caleb's text arrived, run completed, no rounding down. Moose asleep on a stolen hand towel with the righteousness of the blameless. Jordan sent the project change page, 3 checkmarks nested, a small note.
"Tuesday talk ready," Caleb replied. "You sound like yourself, just steadier." Night collected the week's scenes and sorted them into a sequence that made sense without asking for applause. A pilot turned feature, help that helped, a community room where rectangles convinced math to behave, a novel's wheel that completed its first revolution, a body that moved and then rested, money tracked without shame, friendships fed on purpose. The change that had once felt like a thunderclap proved itself a metronome after all. Steady beats, kept promises, weight that moved. In the quiet, Jordan wrote one last note to the future in the project change document and underlined it because retrieval matters. Motion is a kindness. You give it to yourself first, then everyone your work touches. The lamp clicked off, the city exhaled. Somewhere, a neighbor laughed and then remembered the hour and softened. Tomorrow would ask again. Now, the answer had a shape. Thanks for listening to this Wisp Tales story. It's time to change your life. If you felt something shift, even a little, then the work is already underway. If you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to Wisped Tales, and share it with someone who could use a small green light today. Next time, we'll be back with another story built for your hour-long walks, late-night drives, and quiet mornings. Until then, keep the verbs, protect your margin, and we'll meet you on the next tale.